welcome to another episode of the Peaceful Warrior podcast. I'm your host, Jamie, and thank you for joining us. Today I have two very special guests, Tony and Elizabeth from Food is Medicine Australia. Tony and Elizabeth both went plant-based in January 2014 after an unknown debilitating fatigue illness affected Tony for 2 years. Desperate for answers, Tony stumbled across some information about eating plants to heal the body and decided with the support of his wife and nothing to lose, he'd give it a go. 3 days later he felt amazing and has never looked back, and over the coming months and years all their other chronic conditions reversed too. Since becoming whole food plant-based, Elizabeth and Tony have done extensive research into the science behind eating this way. Tony is a scientist by background, and Elizabeth has completed a certificate in plant-based nutrition through Cornell University in the US, on top of her 28 years as a registered nurse. She has also completed the Wellness Forum Health's Food Over Medicine certification course, and at present she is completing the Wellness Coaching course with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Whilst they're not doctors, they are extremely knowledgeable about the relationship between disease and food and determined to get this very important message out to the public. I'd also like to add that this content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. I'm very excited to share this episode with you. There's a lot of information here that I didn't know. There's a lot that they had taught me a few months ago that really helped me to make a lot of positive changes to my lifestyle and diet. We cover a lot of topics pertaining to health, lifestyle, diet, chronic illness, fatigue, and obviously their journey into veganism and activism. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. Sit back, relax. This is a longer one, but I think you'll find it valuable. All right, enjoy. Well, first of all, I'll say thank you for joining me on the podcast. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome.
Where are you guys both originally from?
Well, I was born in Corrigan, in the wheat belt of Western Australia. My family moved around all around the southwest of Western Australia, and probably did most of my growing up in Bustleton down in the southwest on the beach when it was a much smaller town. I was there from about age 5. I think I started primary school there, and my family left when I was about 15, I think. In year 10 we came up to Perth and finished off my high school at Greenwood, and then I used to drive the full length of the freeway in those days from Hepburn Avenue to South Street to go to university at Murdoch Uni.
Right.
So from WA originally.
Okay. What about yourself, Elizabeth?
And I'm from New South Wales. I was born in Sydney. My parents were both from New Zealand, and they came over and lived in Sydney after they got married in 1968. And my brother and 2 sisters and I were born in Sydney, and I grew up there until got married when I was 21. Had 3 babies in 3.5 years and came over here with my ex-husband. He got a job over here, and in 1997 it was a lot cheaper to live over here than it was in Sydney, so we came over here to try and make a better life for ourselves, and the kids all grew up here. So I'm originally from Sydney, but I now call Perth home. I would never go back to Sydney to live.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And how long have you guys been together for?
Well, we've been together for nearly 14 years. In June it'll be 14 years. We met in 2005 on the internet, and we got married in 2013, so just over 6 years ago now.
Wow. So 14 years ago, internet dating must have been a whole different realm. What was that, just off chance? Was it? Do you mind if I ask? You don't have to talk about it.
No, it was kind of quite weird for me. I used to hang out with a few mates, and we'd get on the drink, and I'd come and stay at my mate's place. I used to call it the City House. He lived in Floreat Park, and I was living in Palmyra at the time. And one of my mates was on this dating website that I'd never heard of before. I didn't even know they existed at that time. So I guess this was probably 15 or 16 years ago. And we were playing around, we were drunk and playing around, and he actually pulled up my ex-wife on this page, which was kind of weird. And anyway, I think I must have left it for a while and decided that, because I was single for probably 4 to 5 years, I think, needed to get my head right after a marriage breakup with young kids involved. So
you've both got kids, right?
Yeah, I have 3 boys.
And I've got 3
both
kids,
from previous
1 boy, 2
marriages.
girls.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave it a whirl. Lizzie was the second person I met, actually. So
there you go. Wow.
He had one crazy person and then me.
Faith restored in the internet.
Accidental luck, I think.
Yeah.
And I only thought of it because at the time I was separated from my husband or ex-husband, and he was having the kids 3 nights a week and I was working 2 nights a week. So I had, 3 nights a week. So I only had 1 night a week to potentially not be alone, and I didn't want to go and sit in a bar by myself, and all my friends were married, and so I thought I'll do that and see what happens. And I went for lots of coffee, lots of people, met lots of people who didn't look like what I said they looked like, but yeah.
Mm. And you guys weren't vegan when you met?
No, we weren't vegan when we met at all.
No, we've only been vegan for a little over 5 years now. It was Australia Day just over 5 years ago. So.
5 years ago.
Yeah.
Mm.
And your journey into veganism, Tony, was more to do with a health-related issue that you were suffering with at that time. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was. I'm certainly, in my history, not the kind of person that you'd expect to go vegan. I would have been the person that would have said that's a load of rubbish and support the farmers and all that kind of stuff. So I've become a person I never thought I would. And yeah, it was accidental. I got quite ill. It must be 7 years ago now. And I was ill for about 2 years. I had what was most likely chronic fatigue syndrome, self-diagnosed, because doctors and specialists couldn't help me, despite all the tests I had. And no one had answers. So, but I had really chronic fatigue. I couldn't get out of bed for 4 months. I was sleeping up to 18 hours a day. Yeah, I didn't have much of a life at that time. So I really stumbled onto, ultimately it was a book about eating plant food. It made a lot of sense to me at the time. And
what was that book?
Look, the book I think is quite a good book. It's called the 80-10-10 diet. It's written by Dr. Douglas Graham, who's actually a chiropractor, American chiropractor. He's not a guy that I follow or advocate anymore. But the book itself was actually quite helpful, certainly for me. I mean, it was largely what made me change my diet. Yeah, after reading that, almost straight away, I said to Lizzie, I think I'm going to give this a try. And she was horrified at the thought, because we used to eat out a lot in particular at that time. And when you eat the way we changed to eat, it's pretty hard to have a going out social life around food at least. So,
what was your diet at that point? What were you guys eating a lot of?
I grew up probably, I guess, the traditional Australian family. Pretty much meat and veg, cereals for breakfast, eggs, bacon, all the traditional fare of Australians. So.
But what you were eating, when you were sick?
When
cleaned up.
When I left home, so I'm in the mining sector. I'm a metallurgist, chemist by background, and I went and worked in the mining sector, and it was fly-in, fly-out work, and generally we had a dry mess at the camp, and you eat whatever's provided for you. So generally that was, again, traditional Australian fare. Probably lots of crappy stuff like sausages and chicken and, certainly plenty of butter and oil all across the food, and ice cream and plenty of alcohol. I didn't drink, I don't think, until I was about 21, but I made up for lost time in the early years there. It was not encouraged, but it was very easy and cheap to do that in the old days in the fly-in, fly-out camps. So when I got sick, I eventually went and saw a naturopath, and she sort of steered me towards a better diet, with still meat, dairy and eggs, with vegetables and fruit, but it wasn't it wasn't a fantastic diet, but it was better than what I was eating.
You gave up caffeine and you gave up alcohol, so they were the two big things.
I stopped drinking probably 7 or 8 years ago now. Haven't had a drink since. Don't miss it. Coffee I stopped probably 5 years, maybe a bit over 5 years ago, pretty much when we went vegan, I think. The actual trigger for getting sick, funnily enough, was a big night of drinking.
Right.
We went to a friend's 50th birthday, and both Lizzie and I at the time used to drink bourbon and dry ginger, and we used to take a bottle of each or a couple of bottles of dry, and we had an esky full of ice as well this particular night, and it was outside and dark, and so I had a glass full of ice. And you know how when you pour a drink in when there's ice and you don't really know how much you've actually poured in, and I had no idea how much I was drinking, but I drank a lot in quite a short period of time and wasn't very well, and Lizzie drove me home fairly early in the night actually, and I woke up next day hungover as I would have expected, but I never recovered from the hangover pretty much, and after a week I couldn't go to work. I think I tried to go once and lasted barely a few hours, I think, and had to come home. It was like someone had pulled the power plug out, and just the charge had run out, and I had a couple of goes at trying to go back to work on days that I felt better, but
because you thought it would just kind of
I'd had the problem a number of times over, I don't know, maybe 5 years leading up to it, where I had the same sort of feeling of no energy and just wanting to lie in bed. And I used to work really hard, long hours, probably still do. And I had all sorts of tests again back in those days when it was first happening, and the doctors had no answers for me. And eventually I just sort of decided that, well, maybe this is my body telling me to slow down and I need a rest every so often. So,
how long did you...
Well, it would happen probably 4 or 5 times a year, as much as that, I think.
And it would last about a week.
Yeah, anywhere from like 3 days to maybe 5 or 6 days.
And then he'd come good. So that's why we thought this time it would
he'd
just come good eventually.
I just thought this was the same thing again. But, it just never came good again. So.
And how long did you, between that and discovering the book that you found, how long did it take?
Well, I spent 4 months in bed, as I said earlier,
right.
sleeping. In between that, going and getting tests and whatever else and not getting answers. And started seeing the naturopath in that period and started cleaning the diet up and stopped the alcohol probably a month after I got sick. I wasn't drinking much anyway because I wasn't awake much, but made a conscious decision to stop that. Cut the coffee down considerably, and I think we pretty much ended up down to one caffeine-free coffee a day.
Yeah, you were drinking caffeine-free.
And I wasn't eating a lot, of course, either, because I was asleep most of the time. I got well enough to get back to work after 4 months, which was an office job sitting on my backside, so it wasn't a lot of physical energy required. But I was not well for 2 years.
Yeah.
And pretty much I'd go to work. I used to get paid by the day in those days on a contract. So if I didn't work, I didn't get paid, and that happened for 4 months. So that was pretty tough. And then when I was back at work, I'd go to work, sit on my backside all day, come home, and Lizzie would take care of everything after that because I had no energy to do anything. On a really good day, some days I felt quite like maybe I was better, and I'd maybe go for a walk, particularly if the sun was out, and maybe, it was about roughly 4 or 5 kilometres. If I walked 4 or 5 kilometres, then I'd often end up back in bed for 3 or 4 days just getting over that walk. So,
what was your mental state like at this time? Were you feeling depressed, or were you...
Well, what happens is, of course, physically I looked perfectly normal, other than probably sheet white or grey skin colour. So I didn't look like I was sick to the average person. I just felt completely tired all the time, and brain wasn't functioning properly. My memory was terrible. I had really bad breath. My feet were frozen all the time. There was quite a number of other symptoms. So
it was weird symptoms.
Yeah, and that pretty much did stop. There was a few other things we tried, because when I started seeing the naturopath, there was lots of vitamins and minerals and herbal drinks involved. It was costing me a fortune. I wasn't working, and that was costing me at least $800 or $900 a month. And so, but I was, when I was awake, I was reading whatever I could to work out what was wrong with me and how to get well again, and because the doctors weren't helping me in any way, so I figured I had to do that myself. So to get back to it, when I read Doug Graham's book, The 80-10-10 Diet, it just made a lot of sense. It was literally talks about pretty much eating fruit and suggesting that the human body is one of a frugivore or a fruit eater. Because of my science background, the logic that he explained in the book, it's quite an easy book to read, just sort of resonated with me, I guess, and made sense. And I said to Lizzie, I think we're going to give this a go. And I mulled on it for a week or two, and it was Australia Day that year. I think it was 2014 it must have been. I said to her, I'm going to do this. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I figured I had nothing to lose. I wanted to get my health back and my life back. So she ended up deciding to do it with me, really just to make life easier at home, I think.
Very reluctantly.
And what was it like for you during this period of time, Elizabeth?
While he was sick? Well, it wasn't fun. I also had a daughter at home who also had a chronic illness. She had Crohn's disease. And so I was looking after her as well as Tony. And then I also had a 15-year-old son and then a 12-year-old daughter. Yeah, so I had my hat, plus I was working. So it was pretty stressful living at home, but you just do what you have to do. And, I looked after them and took Ali to her colonoscopies and her infusions and looked after Tony and made his vitamin C and did what I had to do. But, yeah, it was pretty stressful. And, when you were talking about his mental state, I would say go to work and talk to my colleagues, because I'm a registered nurse, and a lot of them would say, well, maybe he's got depression. And I said, he's depressed because he can't do anything, not he can't do anything because he's depressed. And, lots of people had, or maybe he's got a tropical illness, or he was bitten by a tick, or maybe he's got, there were so many different thoughts of what it could be, but no one could give us any answers. And so, it was very hard because, he would, some days he would come up and have morning tea with me because I live 2 minutes from my work. And he would leave home, we literally live 2 minutes from my work. He would leave home 20 minutes before, because that's how long it would take him to walk up there. He used to describe it like walking through treacle. And, he'd come and he'd sit and he'd had a coffee and he'd go home, and then he'd probably get back into bed for the rest of the day. That would be it for him. So, yeah, it was a struggle. But, we got through it. And
I do want to talk about your daughter's Crohn's disease at some point. We'll touch on that as well. So you reluctantly started this new diet of
reluctantly.
eating.
Tony wasn't reluctant at all.
I was
you were ready to try
in.
something.
Yeah, maybe
he was desperate.
Just before I answer that, just to touch, because I didn't really answer your question about my mental state. Lizzie sort of comment on it, but yeah, I guess I probably did end up being quite down. I don't know whether you would call it depressed, but certainly I wasn't a happy chap. You can imagine sleeping 18 hours a day, having no energy, not being able to concentrate, not being able to remember things that you used to know at the flick of a switch sort of thing. It's pretty lonely. I was at home on my own. Ali was there, Lizzie's daughter with Crohn's. We were both sick. The house was dead quiet. We were both asleep. The curtains were drawn. The place was dark because we were sleeping. And it was a pretty lonely existence. And, you know, as a human being, we're social animals, I guess. And, you know, I had no social interaction with anybody. So I think that affects your mental state. On top of that, I wasn't earning any money. I had quite a big tax bill at the time. And so there was financial sort of stresses in the back of my head. So it was a very unpleasant time, you know, one that I don't usually get emotional about, but when Lizzie sort of described some of that stuff just before, you know, it's kind of making me a bit emotional about it. So it wasn't a fond time, but in hindsight now, it was probably the best damn thing that ever happened to me. So
I always say thank him for getting sick, because we would never have found this way of living if he hadn't have got sick.
And that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because you can go along your whole life smoking cigarettes and drinking and eating the Western diet, and maybe not until you get much later in your life would you start to see any, I guess, real symptoms. But, you know, for you, I guess this was really that saying of the darkest hour before the dawn in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It started a whole new chapter of your life.
100%. It was a huge wake-up call. I lived a hard and fast life, I think, like, you know, a lot of my friends, I suppose, and, you know, we would always sort of give each other a hard time, you know, if we weren't out drinking all night and then up at early in the morning and back at it, you know, working, or, you know, it was just, you had to be sort of tough, or you were perceived as weak. And aside from that, I was taught by my parents, probably principally my dad, to work hard. And so I've always worked hard. I started working when I was 12 part-time, and I've always worked either physically or at least long hours, physically hard or long hours. But so, you know, I really probably gave my body a fairly hard time, eating crap, drinking plenty of alcohol, drinking, you know, I used to have at least 20 cups of strong black coffee before lunchtime at work.
That's a lot. Even by most people's standards.
He used to go to work at like 5:30 in the morning if he was awake, because he used to not sleep very well. So he'd get up and go to work, and then he wouldn't get home until 7 or 8 o'clock at night. Like, it was crazy working hours.
Sometimes I go to work at 2 or 3 in the morning because I was just awake thinking about it, and I figured I might as well go and do it. So
what I was going to say was, when I met him, I was 33 and he was 38. And he used to say, and I used to think it was really bizarre that he would think that, he would say, oh, I'm 3 years over. And I said, what do you mean? He said he used to think that he would only get to like 35 and he would die, because he was living such a, you know, I don't know, hectic life. He just thought that, you know, if he got over 35, they would be bonus years.
What made you think that, Tony? Just the way you're living?
Yeah, I think so. I just...
Because I never thought like that. I don't
35 is a fairly...
Young.
That's
young
very
for
young.
most people to be thinking that way.
It's young now.
I think I'm going to last to 150. I'm invincible.
Was that based on how you were feeling at the time, or?
No, I don't. As a younger guy, you know, I was reasonably fit and healthy, probably into my early 20s, maybe even my mid-20s. But, yeah, as I alluded to earlier, after leaving home, I started to eat less well than you know, meals at home with mum. Yeah, I guess I progressively got fatter, put on more weight, you know, probably a few kilos every year without really noticing for a while, and then eventually it became quite noticeable. I used to be quite sporty up until, I used to play Aussie rules footy until 17. I gave that away for study reasons, and then I couldn't have continued a team sport anyway because I was working away. So, yeah, but by the time I got to 32, I started to get, I got gout, which I, you know, always thought was for old people.
What is gout? I don't even know what that is.
It's a really acute arthritic condition. It's caused by uric acid, which is a breakdown product of protein, essentially, and essentially your kidney can't excrete it rapidly enough, so you end up with a concentration of uric acid building up in your bloodstream, and eventually it gets to the point of concentration that it will crystallise. And the crystals usually form in the lower joints due to gravity, and they literally form inside the joint. So if you can imagine the concept of having grains of sand in your ankle joint or your toe joint, just the faintest movement causes extreme pain. So, and it causes, lots of inflammation and heat around the joint. And essentially, I used to get it mostly in my right ankle, and effectively you can't walk. It was just extremely painful. So even walking a few metres to the toilet was just, it was excruciating. So you'd be laid up I would be laid up for days, taking very potent anti-inflammatories to try and reduce the inflammation. And, usually it would probably last between 3 and 5 days where I couldn't do anything with the medication.
Yeah.
So,
and then you had to go on a long-term tablet to help
I was
prevent him getting it again.
Preventer. So, I started taking the allopurinol, which is a gout prevention drug, in my early 30s. I also used to have really chronically bad gastric reflux, and so I would take a preventative tablet for that as well in probably my early to mid-30s. So I was progressively getting sicker.
But just sick enough for it not to make a difference in his day-to-day life. Like, I can take a tablet and keep going. There was it
did what everyone else
stop
does,
him.
right?
Like,
Pop
it
a
masks
pill.
the symptoms and it gets you through.
Yeah. That's all
right.
medications really do, apart from like antibiotics that get rid of infection. Blood pressure, cholesterol, it's all masking a symptom. It's not fixing it. It's not addressing what the root cause of the problem is.
So at the time also I was diagnosed with high cholesterol, and it's interesting because I talked to people at the time and they all recognised those three drugs and those three sort of disease issues as high stress life issues, which kind of made sense to me for what I was doing to myself. Yeah, and look, I would also get really nasty neck and shoulder pain, would cause me quite nasty headaches. And I reckon I was getting those 3 or 4 times a week, and I'd be popping 2 Nurofen with 2 Panadine at the same time, multiple times during a week just to get through the day. So I didn't think I was sick, but I was popping all these pills to keep me going and drinking coffee to probably keep me awake and drinking alcohol to calm me down. And, in hindsight, it was ridiculous. It was just crazy.
So then you all of a sudden try this 80-20.
Well, I did, and Lizzie did it at the time as well. So we literally went, overnight, we went fully raw vegan.
Not vegan yet.
Well, okay,
that's plant-based.
Good correction. Yeah, it was plant-based. We had no idea about veganism at all.
But we did call it that because that's...
Yeah, I guess.
Well, that's a lot of people
we knew at the time.
conflate vegan
don't
diet
understand
with...
that being vegan is more than just what you eat. Yes.
In our case, we just didn't know. We completely had no idea. But literally, we changed overnight and we started drinking fruit smoothies mostly for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, with big salads in the evening, like the whole salad bowl each type salad. And we continued that for 4 months. How
did you feel?
Well, day 3, it was like I'd never been sick.
It was amazing.
I had boundless energy, felt amazing, and it was like I'd never been sick at all. Whereas I'd been taking all sorts of pills and potions and stuff from the naturopath,
and nothing was working.
Really didn't get much better. 3 days of diet change and
just like fruit.
Crazy.
You've cut out a whole lot of chemicals that you eat when you eat processed food. Cut out all oils, all animal products, which are salts, highly inflammatory. All those things you just are gone, and all you're left with is fruit.
Yeah, so effectively it was, complete removal of toxins. You could argue that there's pesticides probably on the fruit, but the amount of fruit that we were eating, as well as greens, so in the smoothies there'd be lots of bananas and dates in particular, generally a lot of mango, and a lot of spinach, baby spinach, blended up in the smoothies. So that was probably mostly what we lived on, or I lived on for 4 months. Lizzie cut it a bit shorter than that, and then we eventually transitioned to eating still a whole food plant-based diet without any oil, salt and sugar, but we started including cooked foods at that time as well. So, and the reason we did that was it gave us a lot more flexibility and diversity. I think in food, you get a bit sick of just having
the same
cold
thing every
smoothies
day.
over and over,
especially in
3
winter.
times a day.
And was it the more that you educated yourself, the more that you started to introduce some of these other foods into your diet? What was the catalyst for that?
I think the month following our eating this way, we've just found all these different Facebook groups, and then we found all this information, and we started watching documentaries, Forks Over Knives. We started reading books. I bought some books, and it was just like an explosion in our head. We could not believe what we were reading. We couldn't believe that this information was true and that nobody knew it. And, you know, me being a registered nurse, I was furious that this information that could potentially save millions of people was not known, even though it had been around for decades. And we just basically did a deep dive into all this information, and we were just astounded, and we were so happy that we'd changed. It took about a month or two, and we were just... And we also found Gary Yourofsky's speech. So we were YouTubing all these videos, and we came across his, and we watched it, and we were just blown away. And so that led us on our path to veganism as well as eating
Right.
a
So
plant-based
he
diet.
kind of introduced you to the ethics of
Yeah, I think
animals.
so.
Had
And
you
then-
thought about the ethics of eating animals before
Never.
that at
Oh,
all?
Not at all, no.
We watched something on Four Corners about how cows were killed in Indonesia, and we were horrified.
This is well before we
Well
were
before.
vegan. Yeah.
Horrified of what they were doing and how awful those people were to do those to those cows, but that didn't stop us one bit. We
We
didn't
didn't make the
even
connection.
think that what we were doing was contributing to anything. So we watched Gary Yourofsky's speech, and then
Earthlings, we watched Earthlings.
and then
too.
Emily and I, my youngest daughter, who still lives at home now, her and I watched Earthlings through our hands one night. We were making dinner, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, Emily, come and watch this." And then when Tony got home, I said, "You have to watch this." And he sat down and watched it. And I remember him sitting there just with tears running down his face watching it, because we'd been crying watching it. And we were vegan after that.
Wow. It is a very hard film to watch, but
we
so
watched
powerful.
We watched it all.
I say to people, it's a real life horror film. It's truly what happens in the farming or animal agriculture industry. It's just horrific. Yeah.
So all of a sudden you've connected the ethics with the health side of things. How did you decipher between the information that, misinformation that gets put out there and the science and the health? Because so many people get confused about what to trust and where to find information from. Was it more the results of what you felt, or was it more your background in science?
I think, the trigger for us to deep dive was the fact that I'd been so sick and got so well in 3 days. It's like there's something to this. And we literally, I think from probably day 3, deep dove mostly into plant-based nutrition. And that was when Lizzie was getting angry because everything we were learning sort of conflicted with what she'd been taught in her degree at uni to become a nurse. And then I think, and I'm not quite sure of exactly the sequence, Lizzie always remembers these things better than I do in terms of what we watched first, second and third, but I think when we worked out that everything, and this was very quick, this is probably in week 1, that all of this information on nutrition that is almost, it's out there and it's easy to find, but you've got to go looking for it. You've got to go know where it is. So effectively it's been hidden from us, from the average person at least, and you have to have a desire to go hunting for it. So we kind of figured, well, if this is happening, what else is there
What else don't we know?
we don't know? It kind of
start
started this
questioning
whole
more.
conspiracy of what the hell's going on here, and really questioning almost everything in life. 7 years on, you know, I'm a completely different human being from 7 years ago. You know, from some of your earlier questions, you know, like my theory of be lucky if I make it to age 35, and just how we ate and everything being normal, drinking and, you know, coffee and all those things that, inverted commas, normal people do, we were doing. And I look back on it now and I just think, you know, we were drones just like the most of the population out there. We were just doing the same as everybody else without the brain in gear, and we weren't consciously thinking about really what we were doing. And then, yeah, this became very evident when my health improved through diet change, and then we start finding a whole bunch of science-based information. And I'm a scientist and I'm reading all this science about plant-based nutrition and how it's the right thing for the human body, and it just caused us to, sort of diverge off. We started learning about the environment, the animals. Now I find it extremely difficult to watch or listen to the news on a radio or on the TV. We very rarely watch it because I just treat most of it as propaganda. It's someone pushing an agenda, more often than not for financial gain. And I question everything. I very rarely believe anything I hear or see straight off the bat without investigating it. And Lizzie used to think I was, I don't know, a bit weird because I never trusted anyone in my earlier life, but I think she's the same as me now. We just, maybe we're the oddball people to the normal crowd, although you're one of those with us, Jamie.
Well, I think to be involved in science, you have to be a skeptic in a lot of ways because you're forced to look for evidence that can confirm. I was never like
that though. Even though I did nursing and it was a science-based profession, I was just willingly accepting that what they've told me is correct, because why would they lie?
But the other side of that as well, which I mean I have to acknowledge because I was contributing to it as well, is social proofing, which means that we often look around to others to validate our own behaviour.
That's true.
So it makes sense that even though you have this information, you know, you have this skeptical side of yourself, it just seems so far out there that
to go against the grain,
that everyone around you would be contributing to something or doing something that would be either so bad for them or bad for the animals.
Yeah, you know, even now, 5 years on, I'm still kind of angry about this situation. I'm probably angry that there's not more people that don't know this and don't listen and look. It's so easy now to see this information, particularly with social media
and the internet. Like that was a game changer for this information, because before the internet, it was very difficult. Like you could only find this information out if one of the plant-based doctors, who were mostly in America, there were none in the 90s in Australia, was talking at a community centre that you could go and listen to. Like there were no YouTube videos, there were no websites that you could go and visit to read up and decide for yourself, instead of just getting what the TV shows thought you needed to have. So it's been a game changer, really.
Yeah, it's much easier to source this information now, and I think particularly when we do some animal activism, I guess with the Cube of Truth with yourself, Jamie. Yeah, it's interesting. The younger generations, the younger kids, most of them have seen this kind of awful footage because it's on the feed in their Facebook or Instagram or wherever. Whereas people of, you know, our generation, I'm 52 tomorrow actually.
Wow.
So people of our generation don't tend to go looking for this sort of stuff, and maybe they're not as familiar with how to use Facebook and Instagram and those sorts of things. I'm still a bit of an old codger when it comes to that as well. But it's almost impossible to avoid it now. And, you know, there's more and more of us sharing this sort of stuff on our feeds and various pages. And, so
the information's become much more readily available. And what about the science side of it? Because I'm sure there would be probably some people listening that would think, well, you know, you're talking about plant-based doctors and you're talking about, you know, certain science. I mean, one of the major things that I get in response to a lot of this is, well, there's good science and bad science, and there's this science and that science. So how do you how do you decide? I mean, you're lucky to be in a position where you can read a lot of these studies, I'm assuming, right?
Anyone can teach themselves how to read something and discern whether it was funded by a company that's making money off the results. There's a doctor in America, Dr. Pam Popper, who runs the Wellness Forum Health, and she does online, I'm going to teach you how to read a journal article and be critical of it. She teaches that to anyone who wants to learn.
That's a great resource. So,
Yeah.
so where would you point people to find that? Sorry.
You go on the internet
Yeah.
and type in Wellness Forum Health.
Okay.
And she has lots of courses. Some of them cost, but they're very cheap. And you can learn how to read a journal article, how to cook food, how to, all things to do with plant-based eating. You can learn.
She does a lot of videos as well on
Yeah.
YouTube and shares them on her
You can
Facebook
subscribe
page.
to her channel, and 2 times a week she'll send you a 10, 15-minute video, and she's looked at the science, and she gives you a synopsis of what it's about and how it affects people and what they can do about it, like realistically what they can do about it. And she's fantastic, isn't she?
Yeah, she is. And there's many of those. Unfortunately for us, most of them are American-based.
Yeah.
But, through the internet, again, they're easily accessible. We are seeing more and more people in Australia adopt this way of life, and also more doctors as well, and more health professionals. We just recently attended a conference in Melbourne run by a new organisation, which is a not-for-profit called Doctors for Nutrition. A good friend of ours, Lucy Stegley from Raw Events, and Dr. Helene Rooks from South Australia have founded Doctors for Nutrition only late last year. It's based on an American, a similar group in America called PCRM, or the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which was founded by Dr. Neil Barnard back in 1985. He started with 15 members, and he's now got 175,000 members. It's just mind-blowing. So the model of Doctors for Nutrition is based on PCRM, and they held a conference in Melbourne. It was sold out. There was 250 people attended, not all medical professionals. I'm not a medical professional. Completely sold out. It was a fantastic event, really great networking event. We met a lot of friends that we hadn't met necessarily face to face before there. Doctors from the US were brought in, including Neil Barnard and Dr. Scott Stoll.
There was also the gastroenterologist from
Alan
Desmond
from the UK. So, and some doctors from New Zealand as well. So. We are starting to see
more
plant-based people and doctors in Australia, which is fantastic. And I guess, again, it's through the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to come back to your question, though, before that we didn't answer, and that is that you asked about how we discern the difference between the pseudoscience or the fake science and the real science. And, it's partly having the analytical mind to reason, I guess, with papers that are presented, but it's also, as Lizzie said, it's checking basics like who sponsors, who's behind the funding of various studies, and sadly, in the modern era, many of the scientific, and I'll use inverted commas for scientific studies that are out there, are sponsored by industry. You'd be staggered how many papers, particularly around nutrition or to do with things like cholesterol, are sponsored by the Egg Board or the Dairy Board or some other front organisation that they are funding behind the scenes.
And for example, in one study, they were saying that eating eggs doesn't raise cholesterol, but they compare you eating an egg and sausage McMuffin with just a sausage McMuffin. So what they're comparing it to, of course, there's not going to be a huge rise in cholesterol. But if you compare eating an egg and sausage McMuffin to a whole food plant-based diet, you're going to get this huge discrepancy. But they're not going to do that because then they're not going to sell any eggs.
It's about the study that they're
doing. So again, to answer the question, generally, I always lead people to the view that now that if there's someone standing to gain money, to profit, particularly from a scientific paper, in inverted commas, then generally you need to do a lot more research and look for other information. What we find, all of the plant-based doctors generally don't have. Okay, a lot of them do have books and stuff, but they're not out generally selling products. Even ourselves, we started our own Facebook page, as you know, called Food is Medicine Australia, and it's purely an information providing service. We also assist people after hours with that at the moment. Eventually we may choose to run it as a business, but we're not selling any products. We're providing some information for people.
We've got nothing to gain from giving that information to people.
Look, I mean, we may charge a fee at some point if we need to make a small living from it, but it's information to help people generally, as in my case, go from being unwell to recovering their health. And I have to say, more than anything, I get pleasure actually out of helping somebody transform their life, like I did and like Ali, Lizzie's daughter, did. It's kind of amazing to watch people transform. I have one guy where I work at the moment. He's English by descent. He's been in Australia for probably 10 or 15 years now. He ate a pretty poor diet, an English diet, lots of bacon and eggs and, and lots of alcohol as well. Pretty poor diet. He was quite overweight. He's about my age. He's about 51.
Terrible arthritis.
No, not arthritis, but he had a partial knee reconstruction last year. He had really big problems with both his knees, and he had several conversations with me, because virtually everyone at my work knows how I eat and a bit about veganism and various things, because that gets discussed from time to time. And he'd asked me quite a few questions, probably over the last 12 months. And at one stage last year, in particular, when he was having knee troubles, I encouraged him to give up dairy in particular, because I think of all the animal-based foods, dairy is by far the most toxic. It causes lots of health issues. And unbeknown to me, he actually gave the dairy up. He didn't tell me that. He gave it up probably about 9 months ago from now. And then he got to just before Christmas, in December just gone, and again, unbeknown to me, he's decided that he's going to go to the gym and really get himself fit and lose a whole bunch of weight, because he was quite overweight. Certainly didn't look healthy. And he was eating a restriction diet, so still the normal SAD diet or standard Australian or standard American diet, meat, dairy and eggs.
Except dairy.
Without the dairy, sorry. And he was going to the gym, I think, twice a day and doing about 3 or 4 hours of really quite strenuous stuff as an overweight person, and burning lots of calories and eating very few calories. And he was telling me, he's sort of showing me the size of like almost a 50-cent piece of meat that he was measuring out to meet with his dietary restrictions. And the poor guy was starving. He's literally starving himself. He was losing weight, sure enough, because he was starving himself and working hard in the gym. And then for some reason, we started talking about it, and we were talking about potatoes. And I got him onto eating potatoes. I explained to him, as I had previously, about animal products being inflammatory and really, causing all sorts of health problems, and how plant foods were, did the opposite and started to heal your body. And he knew my story because we'd talked about it before. And for some reason, he decided that he was going to try it. I think mostly because he was starving. And I was sort of saying to him that, look, if you cook your potatoes without any oil or salt on them, you can eat as much as you like and you're not going to put on weight. And anyway, the penny dropped somewhere, and so he tried it. So pretty much from, actually this was just after Christmas, after we all got back to work, and he hasn't eaten any meat or eggs. I don't think he was eating eggs before. And yeah, I got him to drop the oil, and he's still going to the gym, not as often, not working as hard.
Because he doesn't need to.
And he's still shedding weight, and he comes in just about every morning and tells me how good he's feeling and how full he is.
How happy he is to eat potatoes again.
And he's eating steel-cut oats with bonsai soy milk on them. I've sort of tried to help him, because a lot of people get stuck with what to eat and how much to eat. And
giving him recipes and books
but
to borrow.
He's telling me he loves, he goes and buys a 4-kilo bag of potatoes and he cooks them all up and prepares them. And he's always got cooked potatoes in the fridge, and he's often just eating on a potato, so I'm starting to share a few more recipes with him. But he's just raving about how good he feels, and
his knees all better.
he's not vegan yet. I haven't hit him with all the information about animals and the environment, but that's coming. And
it's amazing. Then that's
slowly
he's
working
taking those steps towards.
Yeah, and he's working, inside his family. He's got a Filipino wife and a son who's about 8, and he's got his mother-in-law staying with him. And of course, the Filipinos like cooking and stuff, and they do a lot of fried food. And he's starting to influence, his family at home. We've showed him we've shared him recipes with how to make things like sausage rolls from whole plant foods, and he loves them, And so I was trying to find things that his young boy would like, and we often eat chips for dinner quite regularly, just dry baked potato chips, no oil, no salt. And so his son loves those, and then vegan pizza or just whole plant food pizza and burgers. And so I think the whole family eventually are going to end up eating the way that we eat. And, he told me he's never going to go back. So
Because, you don't have to miss out on anything eating this way. You can eat everything you used to eat. You just need to change a few things.
And he's not hungry anymore. That's the thing. You can eat as much as you like until you're full, and he's still shedding weight. He looks, his skin in particular is like a pink now. It used to be grey and pallid. And he can tell that himself.
You look,
and
you
other
can tell
people
when
have
someone's...
commented to him, and he's obviously getting a kick out of the comments. So it's really neat to watch this kind of transformation in people. So
it's amazing. Yeah, that story is really, really a great story, I think, to tell, because obviously that's gradual changes that someone's taking, and they've got support there. And obviously I can vouch for that as well. I've been under your guidance now for 4 or 5 months as well on a whole food plant-based diet, and have definitely felt significant differences as well. But what is essentially a whole food plant-based diet? Because you did mention that that's the diet you're on now, but what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, okay. So it means absolutely no animal products whatsoever. So no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no honey, and no fish. And aside from that, then it's pretty much plant foods as nature produces them. So ideally in their whole form. So fruit and vegetables, some nuts, some seeds, small amounts of those, whole grains and legumes are the main foods. So I guess, and in particular, it's leaving out processed foods as well. So many vegans do tend to eat processed foods. Often the processed foods have salt, sugar and fat added to them.
And chemicals.
And preservatives. But the salt, sugar and fat is usually designed to really play musical notes on your taste buds, on your tongue, and make you want to eat more. So it's leaving all of those foods off your plate as well.
When you say all of those foods, it's like 4 or 5 things. So it's meat, dairy and eggs, processed foods and oils, and then you can eat everything else. There's 20,000 edible plants that are available to us to eat. So a lot of people think you take away all those things and there's nothing left to eat. But there's so much food, and the things that you can do with those foods to make them into things that you can't resist is amazing.
Yeah, the other thing that we don't include is salt and refined sugar. But
So let's talk through some of these things. Why no oil?
Okay, this is probably the most common question that we get asked, particularly by the vegan crowd. Essentially, if you think about it, so if we again eliminate the animal products, so we're only talking about now vegetable oils, they are a fully refined, and I won't even call them a food. They're a food-like substance, or have been viewed that way by people. So, in the case of an olive, for example, you squeeze the olive and effectively press the oil out of it. Olives are around about 80% fat by calories to start with, so they're very high fat plant food and something that shouldn't be eaten in huge quantities. But when you're squeezing the oil out of it, you're basically removing the fibre and a lot of the phytonutrients that are in the plant that gives the plant the colour and antioxidants that are also in the plant food. And effectively, you are producing a product, a liquid product in this case, that's 100% fat by calories. And virtually every other micronutrient is removed in the process of producing the oil. So, most people know that white flour or white sugar are not health foods. And they know that because they know they're refined. Refining means the fibre in particular is usually being stripped, and other nutrients stripped as well. So oil's the same as white sugar and white flour in that sense. The sciencey bit is that oil is quite inflammatory to the human body, as is refined sugar and refined flour. These products cause inflammation because they're not introduced to your body, to your digestive system, as nature intended. So they cause inflammation, and oil effectively is known to damage your endothelial cells. Your endothelial cells are a one-cell thick lining of the inner wall of all of your arteries in your entire body. And if you damage those, then you're on the road to atherosclerosis, which is basically heart disease. Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, who's one of our favourite plant-based doctors from the US, he likens them to Teflon in your arteries, in that they allow the blood to flow very smoothly throughout your arteries. But the endothelial cells also attach or have nitric oxide gas bubbles. So nitric oxide is a gas, and the gas bubbles attach to the endothelial cells. And the nitric oxide allows your artery walls to dilate. So when you're exercising, for example, in order that you don't have a blood pressure problem, your arteries dilate so that you can pump more blood through the same vein or artery. And so they open up so that the blood pressure doesn't skyrocket, and so you don't die. And so the nitric oxide is really important for allowing that dilation process. And by causing damage to the endothelial cells, which oil will do, you end up hardening the artery walls, and you don't allow for as easy dilation. So the nitric oxide is produced by breakdown of amino acids, and the nitrogen from the amino acids is used or produced from the digestion of your food. And you produce these micro nitric oxide gas bubbles that attach to the endothelial cells. So if you damage the endothelial cells, then there's not a place, or not as many places, for the nitric oxide to attach. So that's one really good reason to avoid
you've talked about the science
oil
aspect of it, so people that
and
want
it's
to
not
understand
just olive oil, it's all oils. So flax oil, avocado oil,
whether
sunflower
it's extra virgin oil or not,
cold
it makes no
pressed
difference.
oil. Oil is oil. It's all 100% fat. There's no nutritional value in it. There's maybe the slightest amount of vitamin A, but eating oil for vitamin A is like smoking cigarettes to get oxygen. I mean, it doesn't.
Right.
You're getting too many bad things with that one tiny little good thing.
There's a couple of other things with oil. So when you eat oil, it tends also, because it goes into your bloodstream after you've eaten it, it tends to make your blood more viscous and thicken it effectively. So what that means is it's harder for your heart then to pump that blood around. Some studies that have been done of people that have had... what they've done is they've taken a blood sample of a person before a meal and after having a fatty meal, and take the blood sample and centrifuge both the before and after meal. And ordinarily you'd get a clear layer on top, which is the plasma layer, and the red layer splits when you centrifuge the sample.
Blood cells under the bottom.
And so in the before the meal scenario, that clear layer is clear, and you can almost see through it like water. Whereas if you've had a fatty meal, that clear plasma layer becomes laden with fat, and it literally goes yellow and milky, and you can't see through it. So, the fat doesn't just mysteriously disappear. It goes somewhere, and once you've got it in your body, your body has to work really hard to get it out.
Or it stores it.
Yeah, so a simple analogy that I use for people often, and I question them and just say, well, would you pour oil down your sink And most people, the answer is usually no. And I ask them, well, why wouldn't you put it down your sink? And they say, well, eventually it'll block the pipes under my sink. And, there's your answer. When you pour the oil down your own throat, your pipes are going to block up eventually and you're going to get sick. So I could go on for hours talking about it, but I think that's
the rudimentary.
The simple version there.
And so I guess just to finish that section off, so does it build as plaque on the artery walls and contribute to heart disease?
What happens is it thickens your blood, makes it harder for your heart to pump your blood around. B, it causes damage to the endothelial cell, which ends up producing it's a less slippery wall in your artery, and it ends up producing a site for where potentially cholesterol like plaques can form. And eventually, you keep doing this over and over for a long time, eventually you are likely to have a build-up of these plaques that may cause a blockage in the artery and then a heart attack or a stroke.
Well, it causes a narrowing first, and then it can cause the artery wall can rupture and it can completely occlude the artery, and that's when you have a heart attack or a stroke. Or it can just get narrower and narrower, completely blocking it off, so that's when people go in and have cardiac stents put in to open that up, and they leave the stent in there. So it's always a mechanical device, and then
or a bypass.
Or a bypass surgery, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so you touched on cholesterol as well. Where is cholesterol found?
Okay, well, we stand corrected recently that there is actually very minute amounts of cholesterol in plants, which we had dismissed before, but in fact it's quite true. It's not an unfriendly version of cholesterol, but there are very trace amounts in plant foods. Cholesterol primarily, though, is produced by animals. Animals produce cholesterol in their liver.
As do we.
And we're an animal,
yes.
So we do too. It's a really important hormone. It has many functions in your body, and so it's not something that you want to completely eradicate, which a lot of people seem hell-bent about getting it as low as possible. So it's a natural hormone that your liver produces. When you're eating animal products, of course, those animals, their liver produce cholesterol too. So their body parts can contain cholesterol, and whether it's literally flesh or whether it's liquid milk or excretions like eggs, there is a large amount of cholesterol in that food. So if you're eating those products, you're getting cholesterol unnaturally because the natural version is made by your liver. So as soon as you stop eating animal products, whether it's meat, dairy or eggs, then the only cholesterol of any significance in your body is produced by your liver. And so cholesterol then becomes something that if you eat whole food, plant-based, no oil, it's not something you need to worry about in your life ever again. Your cholesterol level eventually, if you've eaten animal products before, eventually will find its natural level. And ours has certainly come down progressively over time over the last 5 years.
But it took a long while because, some people's cholesterol plummets after they adopt a whole food plant-based diet. Ours took a while longer because you have to remember 42 and 46 years of eating all that food. You're not going to undo some damage in a month. So, it can take, years.
Case, yeah.
But it does happen. It will eventually come to the normal level for you.
Yeah. But I think the really nice thing to know, particularly if you eat whole food, plant-based, no oil, is it's not something you actually have to consciously think about ever again in your life.
Yeah.
The likelihood or propensity to ever suffer a heart attack by eating this way is close to zero, if not zero. So you just don't need to know what your cholesterol level is anymore. In all honesty, we do have occasional blood tests. That's the only reason we usually go and see a doctor anymore. And mostly we do that just to see improvement in our blood results. And so we do know that our cholesterol results have come down, but it's not something that we will continue to get tested in life in future because we don't need to know.
And there's two different types of cholesterol, isn't there? LDL cholesterol and is it HDL cholesterol?
Well, they're components of total cholesterol.
Right.
So LDL is low density lipids and HDL is the high density lipids. And HDL is referred to as good cholesterol and LDL as bad cholesterol. And then there's also triglycerides, which is really bad cholesterol. So it can get confusing and complicated when you're going, you're talking about LDL and HDL and triglycerides, but it's not really something that we need to fully comprehend or understand. We just need to know that if your cholesterol, total cholesterol is high, the way to bring it down without medication is to eat a whole food plant-based diet, and it will come down.
Stop eating cholesterol.
Yeah.
Which is animal products, and then naturally, obviously, it's going to come down. And then eventually, once, particularly if you've been overweight, you're storing fat, basically, if you're overweight. So when eventually your body starts releasing that, if you eat whole food, plant-based, no oil, you will, in our case, eventually, in some people's case, quite rapidly, lose weight. And so you're releasing triglycerides effectively
into your bloodstream.
So what we found actually early was that our cholesterol and triglycerides actually went up because we're releasing them that are, this material that's stored in our body fat
into our bloodstream.
And we're still not slim, as you can tell. We're still carrying more weight than we will eventually. So our cholesterol level and triglyceride level is probably still higher than eventually it will be, as not inverted commas normal, because we're still going to be releasing that as time goes on.
But our cholesterol's in the normal range now.
Body weight.
And it's lower than it was when he was on medication for cholesterol.
But I mean that opens up a whole can of worms too. What is normal level cholesterol? Yeah. In fact, cholesterol levels and what's acceptable have been manipulated largely by lobbying of pharmaceutical companies.
So they set the range.
The acceptable level has been reduced over the last few decades. I can't remember exactly when it was done. But by doing that, of course, there's a lot more people with, inverted commas, abnormal cholesterol levels, and there's a lot more people, therefore, taking statin drugs, which are the most profitable drug ever sold on earth. As a result of that. And there's still very poor correlations in statistics of people taking statins and actually benefiting their health from a heart disease and heart attack point
mortality.
Of view. Sure, it brings your cholesterol level down. It does that by making your liver not produce as much cholesterol. So artificially you're stopping a normal body function or reducing the viability of a normal body function because you're, in most cases, you're still eating cholesterol in your diet.
Right, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And what about your genetics versus diet? Because this is something that a lot of people bring up, which is that, like, my father's side of the family have pretty much all had heart disease, and stents and bypasses and this kind of thing. And I was brought up being told that, I had to look out for that because of my genetics. How would you discern between the two, your genetic predisposition versus diet?
Well, it's one of the first questions the doctor asks you, isn't it? Have you had, does your parents or your grandparents have heart disease or diabetes or whatever? So the logical, way of thinking is that it must be linked in hand down of genes. Yeah, look, most families may have a genetic disposition to, diabetes or various autoimmune diseases or whatever. So there may be some, let's call it design fault in the genetics that your parents are passing down to you. But fantastic book written by T. Colin Campbell called The China Study. T. Colin Campbell basically says, and it's a very science-based, based on a very large study in China of very many people over a very long time, 6,500 people over about 27 years. And essentially he has determined from a huge amount of statistics collected in that study that your genes load the gun, but what you put in your mouth determines whether the trigger gets pulled or not. So, my family also have heart disease running, my father's side in particular. In fact, my grandfather on my mother's side also died eventually from heart disease My father's side, most of my dad's siblings, and he had 8 of them. I think five have passed, I think, now, and I think in every case it's one form of it's either a stroke or a heart attack that they've died from. And, the reason that happens is that my father's siblings pretty much ate the same. They ate the same as their parents. And in the early part of my life, I ate the same as my parents because, Mum cooked the food and, you pretty much learn how to cook the same as your mum usually, or your dad, whoever's doing the cooking.
So it's not the genes that get passed down, it's the diet.
It's the cooking, it's the food.
Yeah.
It's the food, and it's always been the food. So, yes, you might be genetically predisposed to a certain type of illness or
chronic
disease or chronic disease, but you can determine whether you get that or not by what you choose to put in your mouth.
Right.
And the good news is that often, even if you have been putting the wrong foods in your mouth, even for many years, as was my case, often these things are reversible. So Caldwell Esselstyn, again, has written a book called How to Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, and he refers to heart disease as a toothless paper tiger, is his comment, because he says it need not exist, and it need not exist because you determine whether you get it by what you eat.
Why do you think our diet has been so heavily overlooked in terms of health?
Because people are making a lot of money. So coming back to the earlier question about how do you know whether the science is real or not, you follow the money trail, and the money trail usually leads you to a whole bunch of lies in my experience. So
you have to also understand that medical doctors and professionals are not taught about nutrition and the link between nutrition and disease in their university course. They may get 6 or 7 hours, maybe not even that much, in their whole entire course on nutrition, and it's usually on supplements like omega-3 and why you need to make sure your patients don't get deficient in vitamin D or things like that. But they're never taught about nutrition like we've learnt about nutrition. So that's why people don't know, because their doctors don't know, and that's where people go when they get sick for advice, and doctors give nutrition advice, and a lot of the time it's incorrect.
Right. And so what studies did you guys do? Because you've actually studied nutrition, I believe, after you went through this transformation.
Well, I completed a certificate in plant-based nutrition with Cornell University in America. It's an online course that anyone can do. I'm not considered a dietitian or a nutritionist, but that course really does educate you on plant-based nutrition and how it pertains to a healthy lifestyle. It
is a certifiable course as well.
But you're not recognised as a nutritionist.
For medical professionals in the US, yes. I don't know that in Australia that certificate would be recognised.
No.
But Cornell University is obviously very well known the world over, and so it's quite a reputable course. It's also chaired or formed originally by T. Colin Campbell, again, who wrote the China studies. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's a lot of credibility behind it. Lizzie's done a couple of other courses as well.
I did food over medicine certification course through the Wellness Forum Health with Dr. Pam Popper. And these are all self-guided online courses that you can do to educate yourself. You get certified at the end to be able to give the information to others. And then at the moment I'm trying to finish, it's taking me a long time, a course with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, because all of the things that we're talking about, it's not just diet, there are other things, and it's really just changing your lifestyle. So you're making sure you get enough sleep, making sure you get enough exercise, stress management, along with nutrition. So they're all just as important as each other. So the American College of Lifestyle Medicine have a wellness coaching course so that you can learn how to give this information to others and help change people's lives.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we first started learning about this, I was having ideas of maybe changing careers or just thinking about doing more formal study on it. And Lizzie said, why don't you go and become a nutritionist or something like that, or a dietitian? And I won't do that, and the reason I won't do that is because virtually all of the courses for these mainstream type subjects like dietetics or nutritionist type degrees are often, well, they're based on mainstream knowledge, which therefore precludes whole food plant-based nutrition. And often they're sponsored by meat, dairy and egg companies behind the scenes. So, they're not going to teach you to not promote dairy or eggs or whatever they're selling.
You would literally fail.
And I would be arguing with a lecturer, all the time. I would fail. They would not pass me,
No,
I'm very
they
sure,
wouldn't.
because I would be coming at it from a completely different
And we've
point of
spoken to
view.
lots of people who have done these courses, and it is literally killing them to complete it because the information they have to put down in assignments is all wrong.
Yeah, so I purposely won't go and study any of those just because I can't put myself through the frustration of it all. Aside from that, I think, Jamie, we've done a huge amount of study self-paced at home. We've got virtually half a library of books and DVDs. We watch a lot of stuff on YouTube, read a lot of stuff on Facebook and whatever. And okay, there's lots of crappy information on those platforms too, but it comes back to that question you asked earlier about discerning the difference between the rubbish and the real stuff. And, we've worked out how to do that. So we've done that really continuously for the last 5 years. And, I often tell people that I've done more study on plant-based nutrition than I did for 2 degrees at university. So, and Lizzie's done, probably more than I have. She's done the formal courses as well. So we're not really qualified in a lot of this information, but we're quite knowledgeable, as you probably gain.
I wanted to just say about how you discern which doctors you listen to and you take on board, and there are plenty of people out there that are tout other things that are totally wrong. So the doctors that we follow, that we first found, were in the documentary Forks Over Knives. So they were our sort of beginning doctors that we looked into, and we read all their research, and we thought what they said sounded right, and we followed them. Then there are other doctors that are on YouTube that have ads, and there's one, Dr. Gundry, who says that tomatoes are bad for you and lectins from legumes are bad for you, and people get confused about who's telling the truth. Now, that he's trying to sell a lot of books, he's trying to make money, whereas these other doctors, they fly around America on their own money, they go to conferences. There's a conference that is online on YouTube called The Real Truth About Health. It's a free conference that anyone can go to. You don't even have to pay, and then they put it online for nothing for people to hear. So they're the people that because there's no money involved. They just want to get this information out there.
That's right.
So as Tony said, you need to follow the money, and the people that we follow and the people that we listen to are the ones that aren't making millions and millions of dollars from this information.
And Dr. Michael Greger is another example
Exactly.
of that as well. And so his resource, nutritionfacts.org, is obviously somewhere that you would point people to
100%.
check out.
Yeah.
And what kind of books would you recommend that people read, just to, like maybe 2 or 3 books that could get them started
A
on this
couple I've
journey?
mentioned already. So the China study, I think, although it's quite scientific, I think it's relatively easy to read for most lay people. Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Caldwell Esselstyn, I think is very important. The Starch Solution by Dr. John McDougall, I think is a very useful book as well. Many of these books, aside from the China study, often have plant-based recipes in the back of them as well, whole food plant-based, no oil recipes. And Caldwell Esselstyn, who wrote How to Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, has a cookbook with the same name. Dr. Greger, who wrote How Not to Die, another really good book, has a How Not to Die cookbook. We really like his cookbook because he's got some beautiful pictures in it as well, and most of his recipes are really simple.
And all these books also have all referenced with all, cited peer-reviewed studies. So they're not just saying what they think.
It's not someone's opinion. It's based on science research.
And they constantly update their
That's right.
information,
They really do.
don't they?
Yeah, they do.
They do.
There's many, many other books, but those few are probably a really good start. And I think for anyone else that maybe is listening, as we've touched on before, we've got the Facebook page, Food is Medicine Australia, and people can contact us through that, and we can always steer them to the relevant information they need.
Perfect. And so there's a few other things I wanted to touch on as well, which is some of the most common nutrients or different things people bring up. So let's start with iron.
Oh, not protein.
We'll go to protein after that.
Okay.
But iron is obviously something that's brought up particularly by a lot of females because they often get told they need to watch their iron levels. Mm-hmm. So if you're following a whole food plant-based diet, do you need to be concerned about iron, and where would you be getting it from in your diet?
No. So I think the most important thing about a whole food plant-based diet, and we taught you this, is that you eat enough. You eat enough calories. So most people like us have been brought up to believe that you have to count your calories and, if you eat too much, you will put on weight. The thing is, if you eat whole food plant-based, no oil, it's virtually impossible to put on weight. So you can eat as much food as you like, pretty much until you feel full. I mean, you're not going to overfeed yourself. Most people won't do that. So you eat until you're satisfied. Generally, the World Health Organization actually says that if you're not able to get at least 2,000 calories a day, that you're actually in a mode of starvation. And, most people that I know in eating a Western diet or a standard Australian diet are eating less than that. And they're eating less than that because they have to, otherwise they're going to get fat. When we lost weight, we were restricting, this is losing weight before we changed our diet, we were restricting to 1,200 calories and less a day and exercising on top. And sure, we lost weight. So just coming back to your question then, eating enough calories is really important. And if you're eating enough whole plant foods without oil, salt and sugar, and eating a variety of foods, particularly green foods, so greens are really important, then iron is not something you need to worry about. Neither is calcium, neither is protein. All of these things you will get adequately. I think the interesting thing, though, again, is through having blood tests, and again, there are, normal ranges for iron and calcium and protein and blah, blah, Now, these normal ranges are based on the vast majority of the human population or the Western world population. And the vast majority of the Western world population don't eat whole food, plant-based, no oil, no salt, no sugar. And so I don't think, therefore, that the standard blood normal ranges are necessarily something that we should be concerned about being within the realms of. So often you will find that people eating a whole food plant-based diet eat less calcium, they eat less iron. The difference is that the iron and the calcium they eat in these foods is absorbed properly by the body because the food is presented as nature intended.
That's right.
And we are fully herbivorous. So it's about putting the right fuel into our body, and the right fuel is plants.
That's right.
And your body will take the nutrients it needs from that food.
Mm-hmm.
So quite likely that our iron and calcium levels might be lower than the average person.
But that doesn't mean
But it doesn't mean we're unhealthy.
That's right.
So also you mentioned about that we're herbivorous or we're frugivores. What things would you point to, very simple things would you point to ascertain that we're herbivorous over omnivorous?
The main thing I would say was that true omnivores, true carnivores don't get heart disease. So if this was a normal diet for us, we wouldn't get sick. We wouldn't have all these chronic diseases, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, heart disease. We wouldn't get sick. So when we eat a diet that is meant for our anatomy, our jaw structure, the length of our intestines, our hands, our teeth, we don't get sick. Things heal, diseases reverse, and our bodies heal. That proves that the diet that we're supposed to eat is the one that doesn't make us sick.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that aside, sort of physically and anatomically, my usual simple answer, particularly the cube of truth, is, an omnivore and a carnivore can only bite, their jaws only move vertically. They cannot move side to side. If you think about it, a dog is an omnivore, a bear is an omnivore, and they have much larger canines than us, and their jaws won't move side to side, so they can't grind their food. Only herbivores can do that. Only herbivores. So quite clearly then we're not an omnivore because our jaw doesn't just go vertically up and down. That aside, we're definitely not carnivores because we can't run fast enough to catch most animals. We don't have claws and teeth to rip and kill and cut the throat of a prey. So we're not very good hunters without guns or bows and arrows or spears. You know, intentionally we're pretty good at gathering and growing plants and plant foods. So
Picking.
And I guess the thing is that even if we were omnivorous, we would still have a choice as to what we could eat. So we wouldn't.
True.
Why would we choose the option that caused the cruelty and the
Exactly.
abuse?
That's true.
watch Earthlings and Dominion, everybody, because you watch that and I would hope that you wouldn't want to contribute to that.
Okay. And so what are some of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to, say, let's start with veganism?
We're all weak and fading away and protein deficient, aren't we?
Though we don't have jobs.
Yeah, we're hippies and we don't have jobs. I think there's a lot of misconception. I have to admit, when we first changed our diet, I purposely told people I was whole food plant-based. I purposely did not use the word vegan.
I didn't.
I felt that, and this is again through social indoctrination, I felt that most vegans were hippies and dropouts and didn't have jobs. I don't know why I felt that. I think that was just socially taught to me, and I believed
It's
that
a stereotype that's perpetuated.
stereotyping and media. So I purposely didn't want to be a vegan because I didn't want to be associated with that social stereotype. These days we are very proudly vegan, and we're proud about it because we know we'll be on the right side of history when the books are written later on in life. The cruelty to animals and the damage to the environment is just horrific, and so I'm the managing director of quite a large global company. I'm the Australian managing director for that company. I don't have long hair. I'm not a scruffy type. I'm
But even if you
reasonably well
did,
presented.
That would be fine.
And but I think that's a stereotype that I had in my head originally, and I think many people do. Lizzie's a registered nurse, has been for 30 years. We both work professionally, and many of our friends who are vegans, are varied. I mean, just like general society, yes, we have some people that aren't working, but there's an awful lot of non-vegans, probably many, many more non-vegans that aren't working out there. So I think that's a stereotype I had in mind when I first changed my way of life, and I think it's completely unfounded and untrue.
And you touched on the media obviously perpetuates a lot of these ideas, which
Of
when you
course.
become vegan, it becomes very easy to see the bias in the media, but before that, you don't know enough about it to discern the difference, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I said before, we used to be drones too, just like everyone else out there.
So what made you want to become active? Active meaning getting involved in animal activism.
Yeah, we know that
Being vegan.
this is not right to kill
that's right.
to kill animals, and when you actually find out the truth of what is happening and how many animals. I mean, just simple statistics like, there's around about 7.3 billion humans on Earth, and we're purposely breeding, farming and torturing and killing around 70 billion land animals every year, not to mention the 2 to 3 trillion sea creatures we're murdering every year. I mean, that's just horrific. And then you see how it's done.
How can
I
we
don't
not
know anyone
get
that wants to
active?
be associated with that, yet, if you're eating it, you're paying somebody to do that. So we don't see ourselves as really hardcore activists in that we generally do the softer stuff, like our Facebook page, if you like. We, as you know, with you, Jamie, we do the Cube of Truth, Anonymous for the Voiceless, in the city and in Fremantle quite regularly when we can. And, to me, that's an opportunity to educate people, to educate the public.
Which is a good point, because we get lumped into all of us being the same. An animal activist is is doing a lot of these protests and part of the Dominion actions and this kind of thing, but it's important to note that we're all involved in different forms of activism.
You can be an animal activist and edit a film that someone's doing to promote veganism. That can be your form of activism. Just being out there doing what society views as activism isn't everyone's thing. So there are different types of activism, and everything makes a difference. Everything, people are changed not by one single thing. So that's why different forms of activism is important.
And that's a really interesting point you've touched on, because you said people aren't changed by one type of thing, which means that even though they might cite the thing that they remember as being the catalyst, which is, for you guys, it seemed like it was Earthlings, it was obviously everything before that led you to that point. And for other people as well, they might hear it on the news or see it on their Facebook feed or watch a film, and it takes, obviously, in some cases, several different things before they get there. Is that what you've noticed through your experience as well?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, again, from attending the Cube of Truth, as we said earlier, a lot of the younger people have seen a lot of this imagery and stuff in their social media feed. So it's not that they haven't seen the footage before, more often than not, and they're often concerned about the animals and the environment because they've got longer to live than older people like us, I guess. But whereas people of our age group, or older, or maybe even from their 30s and 40s onwards, are more often maybe selfish in a way. I was certainly one of those people, where I very honestly, I only changed because of my own selfish desire to get my health back. I didn't change for the animals. I didn't change for the environment. I changed purely to get my health back. Now that I've got my health back and I can think straight and see straight, the animals and the environment are every bit as important as people's health. And the beauty of the whole situation is that, particularly if you eat whole food plant-based and be vegan, without oil that is, you can recover your health, you can be extremely healthy, and you're causing the minimal impact on damage or destruction to animals and the environment that we live in. So it's a win three times round.
Because you're also reducing plastic and wastage and product wastage as well. Is that something that you've noticed as being...
We're more conscious of. Unfortunately, it's in this modern era, it's hard, it is difficult to avoid completely plastics, but
since we eat this
most of our shopping is at the fruit and veg shop, and these days we even have our own
compost bins.
Well, we have our own little geological sample bags that we take, calico bags, to the fruit shop to put our fruit and veg in when we remember to take them.
Living this way of life, you just become more mindful of everything, of what you're doing and how it affects.
But it's interesting. I mean, our waste products from our household now, we used to have a wheelie bin that was overloaded with rubbish
every week
on the verge. Now we have the smallest red lid rubbish wheelie bin, and it's really quarter full. And most of that is plastic, sadly, because it's hard to avoid buying it. Most of our food is from the fruit and veg shop, and our scraps are literally food scraps, and we have a compost bin, and we use the compost to fertilise our small gardens.
And we even use the cut-offs of vegetables to make vegetable stock. So we use every skerrick of every vegetable, and then we throw it out.
Could you imagine this a few years ago?
No.
Never. Not in
so lazy.
my wildest thoughts.
I mean, in the beginning, he wanted to make stock, and I was like, can't we just buy it? But it's so easy. It doesn't really take that much time. It's just...
And the reason we do it is that A, it's easy, and B, it's cheap, but C, we know what's in it.
Yes.
There's no chemicals, there's no salt,
just
there's
water
no oil,
and vegetables.
there's nothing added.
That's it.
We're literally boiling some vegetable scraps in some water and then draining it, and that's our veggie stock. And it's so cheap and easy to make. So
it's amazing.
And then the scraps fertilise the garden after that.
There you go. And living how really I think nature intended for things to go back into the earth and be 100%. Reused. And so do you have time to touch on your daughter's history as well?
Yes.
So your daughter had Crohn's disease.
She did.
At what age was she?
So she was 13 when she started to have bad symptoms. She probably had it for a year or two before that, the symptoms, but we didn't really put two and two together. So the year that she turned 14, so she was 13, 14, and at the end of that year, she just got really sick and she didn't look well, so we went and had a blood test because that's what you do. And everything came back wrong. All her counts were abnormal, or her inflammation markers were really high. So I knew something was wrong. One of the nurses at work with me knew one of the general surgeons, and she showed him Ali's blood results, and he gave a referral to one of the gastroenterologists because her symptoms were gastric based. She had diarrhea and abdominal pain. We thought we'd go and see a gastroenterologist first and see what they could tell us. So we went, and he said, we'll do a colonoscopy and have a look and see if there's anything wrong. And of course, when she came out, he came and said firstly he said she had ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, which is actually, you can only have one or the other. You don't ever have both. So she ended up being just diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And so at 13, that's a huge roller coaster ride. They put her on really strong steroid drugs to reduce the inflammation in her gut. So we're not dealing with the cause, because in their community there is no cause. They don't know what causes ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, which are inflammatory bowel diseases. And so I asked in that first appointment, vividly can remember it, what can we do? Is there something she needs to change with her diet? Is there anything that we can eat? And he said, Crohn's disease has nothing to do with what you eat. She can eat whatever she wants as long as it doesn't make her unwell.
Well, that must make you quite angry now to think.
Now, really, really angry, because we could have got rid of it like that. And so we went through the next 2 years of trying really toxic medications. One of them was a chemotherapy drug, and these are all to suppress her immune system so that she doesn't have the inflammatory response that gives her the symptoms of diarrhea and blood and pus and mucus and all that sort of stuff. And so we got to a point where...
Just to cut in there, I mean, the inflammation is there for a reason.
Yeah.
It's to tell you that
something's wrong.
Something's not right.
Yes.
And you need to fix it.
Yes.
And in fact, the inflammation is your immune system trying to actually repair the damage.
Yes.
So by using immunosuppressant drugs, or any drugs of that kind, you're effectively trying to tell your body that's trying to fix itself to, don't worry about that. We'll suppress the actual immune system,
right? So it stops
and the inflammation.
Healing.
So then your immune system is suppressed as well as having all these awful symptoms. So she used to get sick all the time because she had a suppressed immune system.
Wow.
So then after about 2 years, nothing really helped repress her symptoms so much, because a lot of the times these drugs can put you into remission, a medically induced remission, so that you don't have symptoms of it anymore. But she never had any stage where she was in remission. So her doctor said, because none of these drugs have worked, she is now able to go on to a drug that has to be approved by Canberra government. And it's $3,500 an infusion, and she would have one every 8 weeks, so 3 every 6 months.
Wow, a lot of money.
And every 6 months he would have to reapply and fill in paperwork and send it off to get the script for 3 more doses, which is the next 3 months. So, and once she started that, her symptoms became really manageable, and she didn't get diarrhea as much. She still did, like towards the end of that 8-week period, her symptoms would start to come back again. And so then they would give her another infusion, and it would suppress her immune system, and she wouldn't have the symptoms anymore. Right. So she felt better, but she was not well. She was still
managing it.
She was still sick, exactly.
Were you being told there was no cure essentially for this?
Yeah. If you talk to any gastroenterologist, run-of-the-mill, regular, they will tell you there is no cure. But there are more and more gastroenterologists. There's one in America, Angie Sadecki. There's Alan Desmond in Ireland. They're popping up everywhere that will now say, why don't you give a whole food plant-based diet a go and see how that goes with your disease?
But it's quite interesting here, because Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis are both autoimmune diseases and inflammatory diseases of the gastrointestinal tract. So pretty much anywhere from the mouth to the anus it can occur. And so the logic in the medical fraternity is that so when we eat foods with fibre, and the only foods that have fibre in them are plant foods, whole plant foods, not processed plant foods, the fibre aggravates the walls of the intestinal tract.
The inflammation that's
there.
there.
And so it can cause further inflammation is the logic.
And more like symptoms like diarrhoea and pain.
And so, of course, what they tend to do then is tell you to go eat chicken and white
Low
bread
fibre.
with no fibre.
They promote a low fibre diet because then it
there's less aggravation.
Yeah, that's right.
So then all of a sudden they're compounding.
Yeah.
They're compounding it because they're not getting the nutrients their body craves. So then they're
not getting very many nutrients at all because
they can't because of the inflammation.
They're telling to eat foods without fibre, so that eliminates or largely eliminates plants. And therefore, Ellie was told to eat things like white bread and chicken, and dairy like yogurt. Well, there's no fibre in any animal products, dairy or meat, and white bread has basically had most of the fibre stripped from it, and certainly any nutrient that was in the grain has mostly been removed, and they've added chemical versions of some nutrients back into the bread often.
Do you want to touch on the basics behind why fibre isn't so important just before we move forward? Because obviously some people may not know fibre's role in...
Too tight.
Fibre's absolutely critical to the human body and
to your health.
Yeah, to good health. And again, as I've just said, the only source of it is eating whole plant foods. And there are two types of fibre, soluble and insoluble fibre.
And they're both important.
They're both important. Maybe to give an example, insoluble fibre is completely indigestible. There are no calories in any fibre. And soluble fibre is, if you can visualise when you soak some chia seeds or some oats,
flax seeds.
Or flax, it tends to get a bit of a gelatinous type texture to it. So the gelatinous material is that soluble fibre that's dissolved and sort of thickened the liquid phase. The fibre is critically important to the human body for a number of reasons. It tends to make you full when you eat, so it fills your stomach up. And again, all the fibre has 0 calories, so you're not necessarily eating a lot of calories to feel full. B, it's the major food source for the 2.5 kilograms of gut bacteria that we all carry.
Or 100 trillion.
100 trillion bacteria in your gut.
They love it. That's what they want to eat.
And your gut bacteria, these days the modern term for it is microbiome, which is a bit of a catchphrase of late amongst the health professionals. So 2.5 kilos of bacteria is called the microbiome. And they feed on fibre, and they have a huge determination on the health and well-being of your overall body.
And when they eat all that fibre, they produce chemicals that actually protect us against things like cancer and heart disease, inflammation. Like, it's amazing.
It's an ecosystem that essentially
that's correct.
all works together.
It's so important for our immune system. So people will take a tablet because they think it's going to help their immune system. The only thing that will do that is by eating the right food.
Right. So then getting back to the doctors have told her to start reducing the fibre down in her diet.
Oh, yeah. So that was in the beginning. But
Okay.
once we started the infusions, like I was saying, she got a lot better.
Okay.
And then once we went vegan, she thought we were really crazy. And we suggested that maybe it would help her Crohn's disease. She didn't want to know about it. She was 18 at the time. And she was travelling to Sydney to do a patisserie course in dessert making. And while she was there, she was having her infusions continue. We had to organise a doctor in New South Wales to do that. And so we got to the point where she came home in the June, and I said to her, look, why don't you just give up the dairy products? Just swap them out for some plant-based products. You can get soya yogurt or coconut yogurt. Just try not having dairy and see how you feel. And I think it was just weeks, and she said, I do feel better.
Right.
Yeah. So then I went and visited her in the September. So we'd gone plant-based in the January, and it was now September. And I sat with her and I said, Ali, I really want you to watch Earthlings. And she is an animal lover, loves animals, always has. And she said, Mum, I don't want to watch it. And I said, it will make a difference. Anyway, she watched it. She cried the whole way through it with me because I had to watch it again. And she went vegan on the spot.
Yeah, right. Wow.
She was like, I'm not, so she wouldn't go vegan for her own health, but she said, I can't even contribute to that. That's horrible.
And it kind of shows you different people obviously going vegan
that's
for
right.
different reasons.
That's right.
So she did it for the animals.
She did it for the animals. And she did it overnight like we did pretty much. And she just slowly, so she didn't eat whole food plant-based to start with. She went vegan, so she was having some junk food, but she was eating lots of fruit because that's fantastic for guts and gut healing. And she was having a smoothie. I bought her a blender, and so unbeknownst to her, she was actually healing her gut while not even knowing. And we didn't really know very much about it then either. And so she got better and better and better.
If I can just cut in, as a pastry chef at the time and learning about it, she was having to often taste the food that she was preparing. And, of course, that was made with mostly dairy and eggs.
Yes.
Okay.
And any time she would taste that, she would often get diarrhea and have the symptoms of Crohn's
She would
again.
get sick.
Right, so that would
she
probably
quickly
be showing
started to learn that eating those foods was causing a problem, and when she didn't eat them, she was getting better.
Right.
So that was a useful learning.
So then
for
she
her.
came home from Sydney, and it was the next year. So we'd been vegan for a year, and she'd been vegan for 3 months or something. And she was getting better and better, but she still wasn't right. She was still having her infusions, so these toxic immunosuppressant drugs. And Tony kept saying she needs to stop those. And I was like, oh, I don't know, because we were still new, finding out all this information. Anyway, it came to the April, and I said to her, why don't we see what your doctor thinks about stopping these infusions? And so we went and saw him.
But by this time, she was mostly eating whole plant foods, no oil by this time as well.
And so he said, well, let's do a colonoscopy and see what her gut looks like. Pristine. No sign of any disease whatsoever in her gut.
Wow.
And
what did he say in response to that?
Nothing. And so
Of course, it was the drugs, right? The drugs cured her,
Right,
That was possibly his logic, but he didn't respond.
So we said to him, and she was scared to stop the infusions because she thought it would come back. And we said to him, if it comes back, can she go back on the? And he said yes. And so we said, great, we're going to try not having the medication, and we're just going to see how she goes. And he was like, that's fine. We literally have not been back to see him once.
Wow, it's amazing.
Not one time.
That's about 4.5 years ago.
Yeah, and she's never had another symptom. I mean, if she eats something that's high in oil or a bit junky, she might get a tummy pain, or she might get a little bit of looser stool, and she knows that, oh, I shouldn't have had that. But day to day, she has no symptoms. She has normal bowel motions. She has no pain, no bleeding. Her blood results, all her inflammatory markers are normal.
So it's really listening in a lot of ways to the body.
Exactly, because your body is always telling you.
But it's almost like if you don't give it a break, then you can't even really tell, because it just becomes the new normal, right?
Yes.
That's right.
So really what seems to have helped a lot was her being able to have that break to then go back again and recognize, okay, I mean, obviously every different health issue is different, but is that something you would recommend for people, is to give this plant-based diet a go for a certain period of time to...
If you've got a disease or a chronic illness like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, if you switch straight over to eating a whole food plant-based diet, you will actually be so unwell, because you have to actually heal your gut before your gut can tolerate all that fibre.
Right.
So Ali did that unbeknownst to her. She was doing that while she was having her fruit smoothies and things while she was away. So you have to heal your gut, and the way to do that is to give it foods that is easy to digest, which is fruit, and mono meals, which are meals that have one food, like bananas or all mangoes or fruit smoothies or things like that.
Okay.
But it has to be done in a way that, like a proper program, which we don't have. And we have some friends in New Zealand called Shamiz and Shakul Kachwala. They're two brothers who were born in New Zealand but are of Indian descent. And they have a business called High Carb Health. Shamiz had ulcerative colitis and was very, very unwell, and was this close to getting his whole entire large bowel removed.
For anyone that didn't see that, it was very close.
Very close. And his mother found a book that was called...
Dr. David Klein.
Yeah, Healing Crohn's and Colitis. Is that what
I think that's it.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And so while he was in hospital about to have this surgery, his mother started making him fruit smoothies, and the doctors were giving him medication which he was secretly not having. And within a week, all his symptoms went, and he felt amazing, and he got to leave the hospital, didn't have the surgery, and just healed his body. So his brother, Shamiz and Shakur, they've got a...
His story is amazing, by the way. He shared it at the Doctors for Nutrition conference in Melbourne in February, and it's on, I think he's got it on his YouTube channel. It's really quite emotional. He was actually very close to dying at one stage.
Wow.
And
these
all
diseases
within
can
weeks.
kill you. They have a program, a 6-month program, where people can go to them and they get all the support. Obviously, the program costs money, but it's their business. But they have so many testimonials on their YouTube channel, which is High Carb Health.
Yeah.
And people just healing their colitis and Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, any gastric problem, they've got the program that can help you heal it. And then once you heal that problem, you can eat a whole food plant-based diet, no problem. But if you went from sick to eating that, you would be sick.
Right.
Yeah, so you've got to do it you've got to heal your body first.
I think it's important to note, because then you might get somebody will say, well, I feel worse, and they've done it for a week. And so I guess that's the importance of actually seeking out advice.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really important point, Jamie. So a couple of critical issues. One, particularly when you change, is to make sure you're eating enough calories, as I mentioned earlier. The other one is that often, if you've been used to eating meat, dairy and eggs and processed junk foods, then you have quite a lot of toxic material in your body.
Stored in your tissues
and
things.
When you start feeding your body clean food, what happens is your body starts to push out that toxic stuff. In fact, in reality, it's normally doing that. It's just that you're topping it up all the time.
Right.
So it becomes the normal for your body to deal with, and maybe you don't feel ill. But as you start to eat cleaner and cleaner, your body's pushing this, gunk and goo out through the pores of your skin and, through normal toiletry motions and whatever. And so you can end up with, headaches and nausea and really feeling quite bad. And often that can last for, in my case, I didn't have any issues at all because
he was already
slowly
as
refined
low down
my
as you
diet
can get.
and improved it as I'd gone. But often it can last for many weeks and just feeling poorly. So people have to understand that you may have to go through that, but if you can get through that, then the other side of it just is amazing health. And in the case of someone who's got really severe ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, more often than not, they're extremely ill. I mean, Ali was really, really ill for 6 years, and the toxic drugs she was taking is poison that they were putting in her veins. So it was no surprise after she stopped having the infusions every 8 weeks
that she felt so much
that
better.
She got better and better and better because there was no poison going in her veins anymore, and her immune system started working properly again. And she literally has gotten better and better to the point that, for 6 years there, she couldn't go very far from a toilet. Now she goes for a run around the lake at Lake Munga, or when she was here in Perth, she goes to the gym and she lives a very normal, she works long hours and she lives a very, what we would call normal life.
And she's literally just moved to the UK to live there for 2 years and work and have holidays with her boyfriend. Now that would have been not even a thought.
She was destined to have half of her stomach removed at
She
one
would have
stage.
had to have had a stoma bag eventually. The side complications from Crohn's is things like fistulas and strictures in your gut from scar tissue. So sometimes that can have to be removed. So you have to have bowel resections, which cause more scar tissue, and it's a nightmare. And now she has a life ahead of her that has no drugs. She doesn't have to worry about a toilet. She can work. She feels great. She sleeps amazing.
Amazing.
I know. It's just amazing. And, I want to shout it to the rooftops to tell people that, there's another way. You don't have to live a life of, just
So just getting
awfulness.
back to what Shamiz and Shakur do for healing, it's important for people to understand, as Lizzie was saying, and we can certainly help people with those diseases. Obviously, we've helped Ellie, and you made comments about you made a comment earlier about other diseases, but I call them diseases of affluence, diseases of the Western world usually. Many and most of the autoimmune diseases, including, because a lot of people probably don't understand, but type 2 diabetes is an autoimmune disease effectively. These diseases are all curable, and it's almost as if by magic, by one diet. And the one diet is whole food, plant-based, no oil. And the reason that works is because it's the diet that your body was designed to eat in the first place. We've just lost our way as human beings along the way.
Right.
Another simple analogy that I try and use for people is you put the wrong fuel in your car, eventually your car motor gets sick and might die. That's what happens with our own motor. You put the wrong fuel in it, eventually it'll get sick and
Things
die.
happen,
in my case, I got sick at 44. Other people, don't get sick until their 50s, 60s and 70s. Some people get sick in their teens and earlier. So, it depends on your maybe genetic predisposition, as we talked about earlier. But you keep putting the wrong fuel in your car, it's going to stop at some point.
Well, it's you made me think as well about the fact that, for yourself and for your daughter, obviously, it took to get to this really extreme point where you were looking around for all these different options. But for a lot of people, I mean, even like for myself, feeling fatigued or a bit tired and, and just not that high in energy and not even really thinking that
it has anything to do
with what you're eating.
Well, but often people get to that stage and they just think that's normal too. And maybe, I don't know if you felt that way.
So, yeah, I mean,
I'm getting older.
I got started putting it down to other habits that I, working too hard, like you were sort of thinking
not
about.
Not enough exercise,
or maybe it's due to things that happened in your life at that time. I mean, I was personally going through that year of getting involved in activism. There was a huge steep learning curve, a lot of things you're exposed to, even
stressful.
just stressful. So I started thinking about it in those terms. But as soon as I spoke to you guys and you looked at what I was eating, it became very evident that, hold on a minute, it's very simple. You're not putting enough calories in. And I think it's really good to stress that point because for me, it really was as simple as basically eating more and eating the right types of foods.
Of more.
So in terms of a calorie, do we want to just, what exactly is a calorie? It's an energy.
A calorie is actually an imperial measure of energy. In Australia, we usually use the metric version, which is the joule or the kilojoule. So it's literally a scientific unit of measure for energy.
Right. And
so as human beings, to try and correlate that to a human thing, we need energy to move about, whether it's running, walking, getting out of bed, or just breathing. In fact, most people don't realise, but to run our engine, for starters, our brain uses something like 40% of our total energy requirements just to run our brain. But to just literally sit and do nothing all day uses a lot of calories from respiring, from breathing and running our motor to keep our body at 37 degrees Celsius. Takes a lot of energy. So in fact, the rule of thumb is that for every pound in body weight that you are, you need roughly 10 calories per pound to literally just sit and do nothing every day. So 10 calories a day. So if you weighed 200 pounds, for instance, then you would need 2,000 calories a day to just sit and do nothing. So if you wanted to be energetic and get up and about and run and do things or
use your brain,
just go to work or
think,
then you need more.
Right.
And so this is the problem, as we talked about earlier. Most of us are used to calorie restricting because if we eat meat, dairy and eggs and processed foods, we need to, otherwise we get fat. And we often exercise a lot to keep burning those calories so we don't get fat. And so our energy intake or our fuel intake is lower than often we need. And if that's the case, you will lose weight. So,
but it's not sustainable.
When I referred to our 10 calories per pound, basically, if you were 200 pounds, consuming 2,000 calories a day would mean that your weight wouldn't increase or decrease. In the case of eating whole plant foods, it's not going to increase anyway. And the guts of it is, if you want energy to run around and do things, you have to eat it in the first place. You have to eat enough. And the key point in particular, I think, for you and a few other people we've helped, vegan people in particular that we've helped, is that when you're eating whole plant foods without oil, the calorie density of this food is much lower. The water content and the fibre content is much higher. There's 0 calories in water, 0 calories in fibre. So volumetrically, you have to eat a lot more actual food to get the energy.
And the right types as well,
Exactly.
because that's something that we didn't touch on is, I never thought about how many calories are in a banana or dates. Now I know that if I am feeling a little bit low on energy, put 4 or 5 dates in your smoothie, or maybe eat a few between meals, or those types of things. So it's really also about learning the different calorie density of each food.
That's right.
Exactly. But, whole plant foods, fruit and vegetables, the maximum calorie density, excluding the high-fat foods. So the high-fat foods are avocados, nuts and seeds, olives and coconuts. Some of the other fruits...
And flax.
Which is a seed.
Oh, yeah.
So the other, there are some other fruits like durian that have a moderately high level of fat, but those ones that I've mentioned, avos, olives, coconuts, nuts and seeds, are typically somewhere between 70 and 90% fat by calories. So they're the high fat foods that fine to eat in their whole food, or maybe ground down. In the case of something like flax, you would eat as a flax meal so you can digest it properly. But you'd only have a small amount relative to the overall food that you eat during the day. But if we get back to the fruit and vegetables then, the non-high fat ones, potatoes are sort of up there as one of the maximum calorie density foods in the fruit and veg world, and they're 600 calories per pound. So, if you're trying to eat at least sort of 7, or I usually encourage people to aim for at least sort of 700 or 800 calories a meal. That way, 3 meals a day, you're getting sort of 2,100 to 2,400 calories. And it depends on your body size, your mass, as I inferred earlier, and how active you are, as to how much you need. So, I encourage people to eat at least sort of 700 or 800 calories a meal 3 times a day, and more if you're hungry. And you'll be hungry if you've burnt energy that more than you've eaten. It'll make you feel hungry, and therefore eat some more. And as you said, eat the right kind. So I usually encourage people to eat fruit between meals as a snack. Bananas are great because they're relatively high calorie density. They're about 110 calories for a medium-sized banana. A medjool date's about 66 calories for a medjool date. So, and they're relatively small volume. They're, in my words, they're fast food. You can carry them around with you fairly easily.
You've gone level 10 vegan when a date is fast food.
Exactly.
Level 10.
You're over level 10 maybe. So you have to eat enough calories, and if you don't, you're going to feel tired and fatigued, and then you're going to say, oh, this diet doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. And usually the answer is as simple as increase the number of calories of the right kind.
Perfect explanation. So I think we'll start sort of wrapping things up a bit, but what do you guys have planned for Food as Medicine coming up, and maybe a brief description about what it is and what you guys have planned? So
the Facebook page we started January last year. We've got just over 6,500 followers on there now, and as I said earlier, it's really an information sharing page. People do contact us through Messenger on that page, and we have assisted quite a number of people all around the world, which is kind of nice and interesting, from Scotland and America and Uganda and all sorts of places. So, and often we'll have a phone hookup via Messenger or Skype, to help people and coach them as to what's wrong with them and how to eat a whole food plant-based diet. Eventually, we have, designs on running it as some form of a business, ideally doing, coaching, probably in groups rather than one-on-one, although we'll probably do both, and running workshops.
Program.
As you know, we've run things like documentary screenings at the Peace Tree that Jamie himself here runs, which is a great little community centre in Hay Street, Subiaco in Perth. And we've provided food and done Q&As after the screening, and they've been reasonably well attended, and generally some pretty good interaction afterwards, and we've had a few people remain in contact with us after those sessions. So, having healed my own self, I recognise the fact that I was such a stubborn individual before, and maybe still am to some degree now. I would not have ever changed my lifestyle or my diet if I didn't get sick, and as chronically sick as I did. And I think that if that's true for me, I think that's true for many people. And so I think, sadly, it takes a lot of people to get chronically ill. And so I think really the goal for us is to help people that are chronically ill and help them get their life
Really
back.
probably the help you wish you had had at
Yes,
that earlier time.
Exactly that.
Absolutely.
Exactly that. My own journey, I could not find anyone that could help me. They just didn't have answers for me. And, I actually felt at one stage that, the whole medical fraternity is just completely inept. They just didn't. It didn't fit a certain diagnosis. A blood test didn't come up to give them an answer, and they were ill-equipped. They had no other answers.
They had nothing.
So
I
was left
both stories,
lost.
both instances.
Yeah, in both cases,
Yeah.
Ali as well. So, so I had to go and do my own research and investigation. And yes, if I could have found Food is Medicine Australia back then, it would have been a much quicker and easier journey. And maybe I wouldn't have learnt as much on the way. But, not everyone's going to go and put the time and effort and study in that Lizzie and I have done. And most people won't probably. So, I think genuinely we really like the idea of being able to help people and put something back into the community.
Amazing. And so what would you say to anyone who, I guess, maybe relates to how you were before being vegan, is a bit unsure, a bit uncertain? What would you say to people? What would you say to yourself, a version of yourself a few years ago about veganism? If they want to try it, or they're curious, or they're not sure.
I think if I spoke to myself 8 years ago, I don't think I would have listened to myself, sadly. Again, it took me getting chronically sick to be open.
But what would you say?
I think, a lot of people are maybe not as stubborn as that, and they do listen, and we know that from doing the Cube of Truth. Often people are inquisitive. What would I say?
Just try it.
Yeah, just try it.
Just try it for a month and see how you go. You don't have to think this is the rest of my life. Just have that goal of 4 weeks, and I'll give it a go, like really wholeheartedly give it a go, and see how I feel at the end. If nothing changes, then you can always go back to eating the food you were eating before.
And also, I guess something we didn't really touch on in so much is that cutting out certain things over time. Like if you're already vegan, then you can start with oil. And then you could go sugar.
And then you can go salt.
So maybe the same thing with vegan. You can cut out dairy and then
That's right.
meat.
We did it overnight, but there are 101 different ways to do it. You don't have to do it the same way.
That's right. It's interesting. We did a presentation at the Perth Vegan Expo only a few weeks ago, and one person from the crowd asked after we presented, whether we would encourage people to try and do what we did and go vegan or go whole food plant-based overnight, or whether, a transition is better. And, I'm one of these people that can do the overnight thing. I'm very disciplined about most things I do. When I set my mind on something, that's it. I've decided and that's what I'm going to do. And I use the analogy, and I've heard a few of the plant-based doctors use this, and I still think that in my mind, this is the better way. But
if you're sick, if you're sick.
So this is for people that are ill,
Yeah.
who have illness, whether it's diabetes or obesity or
and you
Crohn's
want to get
or whatever.
heal those things.
And it goes a bit like this. You know, if you're an alcoholic, you don't cure yourself from alcoholism by stocking the fridge with beer and trying to only limit yourself to 1 or 2 beers. It's virtually impossible to do that if you're an alcoholic. You know, you're likely to clean the fridge out every time you put the stock in the fridge.
Open it.
So I use the same analogy for the food, and that is, I think, in particular, if you're really ill, we're helping a lady at the moment who has really bad chronic fatigue, and hopefully she's taking our advice, you know, and that is clean your kitchen out. Just get rid of all the crap food out of your kitchen, all of the animal products, all of the processed foods.
Don't have the temptation
Start again.
there.
We literally filled a wheelie bin full from our cupboards and fridge and freezer, and then stock your house with good food. Go buy a box of bananas, buy a box of dates, buy all the veggies and fill your fridge up. Buy bags of oats and all the healthy food,
pasta,
soy milk and things like that. Ideally, soy milk without chemicals and oil in it. So read the labels. So we teach people to do that as well. And effectively, when you get hungry, then the only food you've got is the healthy food that you can eat. The other analogy that I use with people that are sick is that with a fire, you cannot put a fire out if you just keep putting little bits of fuel on it every 3 times a day. The fire will keep burning. Okay, you might reduce the size of the fire, but the fire will keep burning. The only way to put the fire out is remove the fuel entirely, and that's the same with health. In particular, if you've been ill, you've got to go 100%. So Dr. Pam Popper that Lizzie's mentioned a few times, makes the analogy of it's a bit like a combination lock. You get 3 numbers out of 4 right, the lock doesn't open. You have to go 4 numbers. You have to go 100%. So if you're ill, it's not go 90%, it's not go 95%. It's clean your diet up entirely, and you'll clean up your health.
And I think that's a really good distinction to draw. For anybody, I guess, that's vegan, that wants to give the whole food plant-based diet a go, that it maybe isn't suffering from an illness,
Well, the same thing we sort of spoke to you about originally, and it's been interesting actually through the Cube of Truth. First of all, we've met an amazing group of whole new friends through doing some of the activism and education that we've done. Second of all, I think we're slowly infecting the vegan crowd that do this activism by teaching some of this nutrition sort of information to them. And you're not the only one that's, sort of said to us that tired and fatigued amongst the vegan crowd. So we're starting to notice there's a number of Perth vegans who are starting to drop the oil and change their diet and get healthy. So I think the advice to them is the same as you. It's take the oil out. It's probably step 1. Ideally, take the salt out, which a lot of people struggle with. It's probably less critical, but it's important. Eat enough calories is really important, and eat the right kind of food. So drop the processed foods, stop all the fake meats and stuff that are made from highly processed soy or gluten, usually with a heap of fat and salt and sugar added to make it taste great, so you want to eat more. Stop those foods entirely and fill your house up again. Go to the veggie shop and buy a whole heap of fruit and veg. And
no magnums.
No magnums. Look, I think
it's okay to try one
if you're not
in a blue
sick,
moon.
If you're not sick and it's really calling you, maybe have one every so often, as Lizzie said. But
I
don't
think you have to
go
know
buy a whole
yourself
pack.
as well, because personally, I knew for myself that if I did that, then that would have opened up that as another option, and I would have been more likely to...
So you can't just have one and just think that
No,
I've had it now.
I have to have that discipline, and I've had several times... I mean, I guess I should probably let people know I've been on the whole food plant-based diet for about almost 5 months now, and there have been several times when I've gone out, particularly after activism or different things, and I've been given the option, have a grilled burger or have a Magnum, whatever it might be, and I've said no. And that took a lot of willpower, particularly because you're around other people that...
It can be hard.
It's like, I guess, with alcohol, because there's that social acceptance, then everyone asks you, you get attention. So it definitely took a lot of willpower. However, the way I like to think about it for myself now is I like to think not how I will feel in that moment, but how I will feel later.
Yes.
So this is a big thing that I've come to realise in many aspects of my life, is doing the thing that gives you the pleasure of that feeling in the moment.
How are you going to feel later?
How are you going to feel later?
What's the saying that Andrew Spudfit Taylor says?
Thing that you feel like you're sacrificing. So I'm sacrificing this piece of cake for... No, I'm sacrificing... I can't even remember what it is.
Yeah, a piece of cake.
Yeah.
So,
but what you end up sacrificing is your health later on. So
that's right. Thinking longer term.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
the short-term pleasure is affecting.
That's
is
right.
a long-term sacrifice. You might not connect the two because of the time differential, But it really is, everything that you put in your mouth that is not healthy is doing some damage. You might not feel it straight away. And what I want to ask you is, I'm sure that amongst that 5-month period you did give in to some temptations.
I've had 2 burritos, a
and
pizza.
How did you feel afterwards?
If I'm honest, one of the biggest takeaways that I've found is that we tend to eat things with one flavour. So I actually found it really boring because when I ate the burrito, it's all mashed in together. And once I tasted that first bite, I knew exactly how the rest of the burrito was going to taste. Mm-hmm. And it was a really interesting thing for me because I then realised that the different flavours of the vegetables or whatever you're putting in, you start tasting individually, and that makes the meal more enjoyable.
Yeah.
So I actually started eating slower and enjoying my food more.
Yeah.
And obviously if you cook everything together, you might still get the curry flavour or whatever you've put with it. But for the most part, because I was adding a lot of raw fruits and vegetables, the flavours were what kept me coming back to eating whole food plant-based. So I didn't expect that. And I definitely, like last night, I was really tired and I felt like, maybe I could order a pizza or maybe I could do this.
Yeah, it felt like, I can't be bothered.
I can't be bothered because I'll be honest, like I've never been that much into cooking. But I think one of the things I want to let people know is that really the amount of time I spend cooking would be far less than it was before, because when you're frying something in oil, for one, you've got to constantly watch it and you've got to make sure you don't burn it. When I cook now, it's really steaming potatoes or cooking rice, and you really just put it on and leave it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you come back and check on it maybe 10 minutes later and then I'll chop up a few things and it's done. So I think that's also kept me coming back to that as well.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So, if you gave into those temptations, though, you're probably, if you've eaten out, you've had some oil and things that aren't good.
So how did I feel?
Yeah.
So sorry. Yeah, the original question of how I felt afterwards. I mean, so one example I'll give you that I think I've told you before was going to the movies and eating the popcorn.
And you felt like you had a hangover.
So I felt like I had a hangover because I ate a whole box of large popcorn and probably the salt content would have been extremely high and butter.
I get that if something's too salty.
And so the next day I felt poisoned.
Yeah, like
So
you had a hangover.
That was the time.
Swollen.
Swollen, and I felt like I had food poisoning essentially.
Yeah, it's awful.
So that's an example, but it depends on what you're eating.
So, and the reason that you would have felt that way, assuming you had vegan popcorn without butter
vegan.
on it.
It was vegan butter.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, you had the oil, maybe vegan oil, but still oil, and second, you had the salt,
which was
and you would have had a lot of salt, no doubt, because that's how they produce it in the movies or at the movies. And the reason you probably felt so puffy and not so great is that the salt, to stay alive, your body will retain fluid, will retain water. Otherwise, the concentration of salt will kill you. So the body does that automatically. So you end up holding more water in your body, and that's why you felt puffy. If you weighed yourself, you probably weighed heavier that day because you were holding extra water. And also the salt, therefore, also has a dehydrating effect. So which
I felt very dehydrated.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't quench it. Like I would just keep drinking.
Yeah, that's because the salt.
And it wasn't
you
enough.
Need to.
And isn't it amazing when you haven't had salt for a while, which I think is your case now, when you have a little bit of salt, it tastes super salty now.
Super salty, yeah. And I think that's the good thing about doing it the way I've done it, where I've done it long enough now to really be able to tell. And the other thing I want to mention is I don't really look at those things anymore as food.
No,
and I think it's the same way that when you become vegan, you change your perspective on animal products. People might say, oh, do you miss this or you miss that? And yeah, when you become vegan, you make the connection. You really don't, because you don't see it as food anymore. I never thought I would get to the point where I wouldn't be seeing, ice creams and all pizzas and all these things as really food, because I think that my relationship to food has completely changed. And does your palate refresh as well? Because I honestly felt like my taste buds
100%.
That's why you can taste all those foods individually now, because your taste buds are unadulterated.
So one of the things when you mentioned your burrito and it tasted kind of, you've had one mouthful and it's going to taste the same. But no doubt, my suspicion is there was probably oil amongst it as
And
well.
salt.
Right, there would have been, yeah.
And the oil tends to coat your tongue. I mean, I haven't had oil now for over 5 years, and as soon as someone puts a drop of oil in my food, I can tell immediately. It hits my mouth. I can feel it on my lips. And, it tends to coat your tongue, which is your taste buds. So it tends to dull down the flavour of what you're eating.
Wow, okay.
And that you become tolerant to the high salt, high fat. So when you eat something that doesn't have those things, you think, oh, this is bland. This doesn't even have any flavour. It's just because you can't taste it. It does have flavour. It's just because your taste buds aren't working properly.
That's right.
And so often, these artificial foods need to really enhance the flavours because of this sort of issue with, the fat sort of dulling down your taste, and the salt hides the flavour as well.
Right, so they keep upping everything.
Yeah,
That's right.
up the ante.
And that's why you have to eat foods with that high amount of stuff, because nothing tastes nice.
You're chasing that pleasure feeling, and you have to keep upping the ante, if you like. And as Dr. Greger says, you can never find a berry or a peach or anything that tastes as sweet as Fruit Loops.
Yeah.
Because they've engineered Fruit Loops to be super sweet, to trigger your brain to recognise that I want more of this.
Yes.
Because they want to sell you more of it. And it's way sweeter than a natural fruit. If you just went and ate the fruit, it'd be a lot less sweet, but you don't get all these artificial, things going on in your body as a result. So,
and also, I guess the thing is that you're going to be craving more of that.
You do.
Because your body, and then you overeat.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, salt in particular is a really good thing to cause that. I don't know the actual mechanism, but if you eat salt, and the reason they put salt in these manufactured foods is because it does tend to, for some reason, click some mechanism in your brain to crave, and you actually tend to overeat. You tend to eat more than you would if there wasn't salt.
Well, I wouldn't. Food. When I was eating that box of popcorn, I really felt like, wow, I don't even know if I could have done this before.
Yeah.
So what I think had happened is my brain went, wow, we haven't had this in a while.
Exactly.
Yes.
Let's go all in.
Yeah,
and I physically didn't feel like I could stop myself from eating it all.
Yeah.
There was a doctor in the 30s called Walter Kempner. And he did I don't know if it was his study actually, but there was a study done on people, just normal sized people, who just ate some rice, plain white rice with nothing on it, and they ate till they were full, and they measured how much they ate. And then they did the same experiment maybe a week later, and they put salt on the white rice, and that was the only thing that they changed, and they ate way more.
All right. Okay.
Because it triggers something in your brain. And so that's what salt does. It does make you eat more.
And obviously a lot of the other things that they're putting in the foods, we didn't really touch on the preservatives, flavorings.
Yeah.
I mean, what's in like caking agents and all these different things.
Yeah, look, it's, actually it's interesting if we go back in history, in my history at least, I used to use the logic that if there's food on the shelf in a supermarket, well, surely there's government authorities and there's someone checking that whatever is in that food, it must be safe.
They wouldn't let me eat something that
Exactly. That was the logic I had. Well, don't be fooled. That's just naive. That's just silly, because no one out there is looking after your health except you.
They're just trying to use every skerrick of
the reality
whatever
is
they
that,
can.
in particular with any packaged or processed foods, the manufacturer of those foods and the supermarkets themselves don't want those foods to go off while they're on the shelf, because that's going to impact their profit situation. So they put a whole bunch of chemicals in the food to make sure that the food preserves and doesn't go off, preserving their profits therefore. The thing is that most of those chemicals, if they've been tested on humans, I'm sure are not good for you. Most of them haven't been tested on humans. There's an assumption that in a small amount or whatever, they'll be okay. But the reality is that for a food to go off, as we would say, or to rot, there's bacterial interaction. There's bacteria breaking down and feeding on that food. To stop the food going off, therefore you have to stop the bacteria wanting to eat that food. So you're putting chemicals in there to stop the bacteria eating the food, thereby preserving it. don't forget, earlier I said you have 2.5 kilos or 100 trillion bacteria in your gut.
Wow.
And you start putting food with these chemicals that are stopping the very bacteria eating that food in your gut.
And they don't want to eat it.
What do you think that's doing to your gut bacteria,
Your immune
microbiome?
system.
So it's really quite scary, and sadly, most of the foods in the supermarket, I read very quickly the label and put it straight back because there's a whole bunch of E numbers or artificial colourings or artificial flavourings, which could be anything. Some of the artificial colourings, for example, flavourings like caramel flavour, comes from a beetle anal gland.
Isn't that the same and they use crushed up beetles for
the red colouring? Yeah. So A, they're not vegan, these products. B, they're not.
They just put natural flavours or natural colours. What?
But you have no idea because you read natural colours or flavours.
You think,
don't know what it is.
That's all right.
You have no idea. So anything that says natural colours or flavours, for me, goes straight back on the shelf. That's for one of the people I don't like. And if there's any E numbers or anything that doesn't resemble a natural food, if it doesn't say capsicum or tomato or potato or corn, then it's not a natural food or a fruit.
There are things like citric acid
and often they will incorporate things like citric acid or calcium chloride, which
vinegar.
Is a firming agent. Acetic acid, for non-chemists, is actually vinegar. It's a chemical name for vinegar.
So there are some things that you can go,
it's probably okay.
Yeah.
Except I use the logic, if it says acetic acid, it was probably chemically produced and therefore I don't want to put that in my body.
So
if it says apple cider vinegar, that's still acetic acid, but it was made from apples and therefore it's probably better than the acetic acid version.
Right.
So, I'm probably fortunate to have a bit more chemical knowledge than the average person, but
you can train yourself though. Essentially that's what I've had to do. I didn't really explain that the first thing that got me started on my whole food plant-based journey, aside from the tiredness, was that I pulled out a packet of cereal in the morning and I went to eat it and you went, oh, and I went, what? Hold on a minute. And I turned around and then this is when you started explaining what you've explained today. And I think that's one of the biggest things I've noticed is that things that you were taught were healthy, like granola and cereals and things that you are not. And also raisins, dates, all these things are just completely coated in oil.
Yeah, it makes it really hard for us,
It makes it hard. Then even you're making it to the point, well, you can't get these dates, you have to get these dates. And look, you work in steps towards that goal.
But knowledge is power. So if you know this stuff, and once you know it, you can't unknow it.
You only have to learn it once.
That's right.
The reality is it's more inconvenient for us
because we have to change
because
something.
we have to read the labels and we have to
spend time.
For instance, simple things like raisins and sultanas, you would think you could just go to the supermarket and buy it, and it should be all right. It's just a dried fruit, surely. But more often than not, most dried fruits have E2O2, which is sulfur preservatives. Now, Lizzie used to have asthma very badly. Her asthma is almost gone these days through diet. But sulfur compounds used to really trigger her asthma, and she'd be on the puffers straight away after it. She always said she couldn't drink red wine. Well, that was a sulfur preservative in the wine usually. So even, simple sulfur chemicals, they're not designed for the human body. And I usually say to people, if I put a bucket of chemicals on the table, would you drool at the mouth and want to eat them? And the answer is definitely not, right? But so if I put those chemicals in your food, why would you want to eat the chemicals? Because suddenly you can't see those chemicals; they're disguised. Why would you eat it that way? Because it's the same as me putting the bucket of chemicals on the table and you just put a bit on, sprinkle some on your food.
I always remember that movie that Michael Moore did where he showed you, I think it was in that film, he showed you the sugar content of, say, a Coke or, a McDonald's burger or something like that. And that visual representation of seeing just how much was in there. Yep. And you thought, would you just eat whatever, 20 grams of sugar or something like that.
I think a can of Coke has the equivalent of something like 16 teaspoons of sugar. And you couldn't actually eat it.
Yeah.
You couldn't. I don't think you could.
No, you couldn't. You'd have to wash it down, and you'd essentially make Coke. So,
pretty much. Yeah. But so just coming back to this point though, because you made the comment earlier about going to the movies and having popcorn. I just want to make the distinction, and so a lot of foods that vegans or most people even eat and like, you can still have, and we still eat these foods.
We still have pizza.
We have popcorn.
We still have burgers.
We have an air popper at home, and we pop popcorn. There's no oil on it, and we don't put any salt on it. If we really want to be, have a day out, we might melt up some maple syrup and a bit of raw sugar or something in a pot, and drizzle that over the popcorn,
and put it in the
oven on some baking paper, and make really
yummy popcorn.
But that's not whole food plant based, but that's an occasional treat.
Yeah.
But we go to the movies and we pop a whole bunch of popcorn and put it in a plastic bag or a container and take it.
And you
to
know
the
what?
movies.
It's still moreish, but you can taste. And I feel like it's even salty sometimes, but there's no salt on it.
No salt on it.
Just the natural sodium in there.
And it's 100% corn. It's very healthy for you. There's no
That's right.
problem. So don't be put off by, I can't eat popcorn anymore. Yes, you can. You just got to have the no oil, no salt version of popcorn.
Or even if you want to make an ice cream, you want to just
make it from bananas.
Use bananas and blend them.
Frozen bananas.
And some strawberry, and you got strawberry ice cream, put it on some pancakes. Yum.
That's right.
I make pancakes from rolled oats and bananas, blended up in the blender with some sparkling water. And that's it. And pour that onto a hot pan,
so yum.
Non-stick pan, and
so you don't need
throw
eggs
some blueberries
and
in it, and
butter.
Put some maple syrup and some cut fruit and some berries on top, and it's delicious. And it's breakfast or lunch, and it's a really healthy meal.
And you can still have pizza.
You can eat all these foods, but you do have to be careful when you go to the supermarket. We go to the supermarket maybe once every 2 weeks to once every 4 weeks. That's it now. Most of our shopping's at the fruit and veg shop, we like the Indian the Indian wholesale shop where we get lots of spices and things like pulses and dals and beans, dried beans.
Yeah, it's really cheap, and they have raisins with no oil.
Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, and also Kukulis Brothers we like because it's another one of those shops where you can measure out nutritional yeast by the kilo, or
you can buy a kilo bag of steel cut oats for really cheap.
We buy 25 kilos of steel cut oats at a time for about $44 for 25 kilos. It probably lasts two of us 6 months or so. It's so cheap to eat this way.
So buying everything in bulk is a really great way to save money.
As long as you can store it properly, and in the case of oats, keep the bugs out of it and that sort of thing.
That's the next step, I think, is to start buying more in bulk.
Yeah.
And obviously then you reduce your plastic, because if you're buying lentils and oats, everything in plastic.
Yeah.
So that's another thing for those zero waste vegans.
Yeah.
So if you're buying your sultanas or raisins, as you said earlier, try and find the ones without oil, and often it'll be a minuscule amount of oil. But I think another thing I taught you is that 1 gram of carbohydrate or protein is the equivalent of 4 calories of energy. 1 gram of fat is the equivalent of 9 calories. So if you're having even a little bit of oil, you're having a lot more calories than you would be if you're having protein or fat or carbohydrates rather. So a small amount of fat in a food, it might, if you look at it in the nutrition guide on the side of the packet, it'll tell you the number of calories per 100 grams of that food, and it'll usually show you the fat content in grams per 100 grams as well. And I gave this example to the guy who I mentioned who works with me just the other day. I wrote it up on my whiteboard and he took a photo of it. And so I showed him that, maybe 100 grams of, this is an arbitrary example, but maybe 100 grams of food is the equivalent of 100 calories, arbitrary example. Maybe there's only 1.5 grams of fat in that 100 grams of food.
So you think it's 1.5%?
So you think it's 1.5%
out of 100
fat, and you think it's low fat. That's probably okay. But in reality then, that 1.5 grams of fat is 9 calories per gram, so that's 13.5 calories of fat. If the whole 100 grams of food is only 100 calories, then that's actually 13.5% fat by
Not
calories.
1.5%.
Okay,
Right.
that's a
So
good way
you
to
think
work it
there's
out.
only a very small amount of fat in the food, but in fact your body is registering the food as calories because your body's only interested in
Yeah,
calories.
because they give
for
it to you
energy.
in weight, not in calories.
Yeah.
We use it in calories. We don't care about the weight of it.
And for anyone that's listening that's non-vegan and thinks they're eating healthy by having the low-fat dairy milk option as an example, it's often only 1 or 2% fat as it's written on the label. But the reality is that 95+% of the milk is water, which has 0 calories in it, and it might only have a very small number of grams of fat per 100 mil.
meals.
But most of the 100 mil is water. So if you work it out as fat by calories, it's about 35% fat.
Right.
So you think you're having a low-fat food, but you're
It's
still
marketing.
having 35%
And they do that
fat.
on purpose.
Wow,
It's
it's very misleading.
Very
Completely
misleading.
on purpose.
It's like,
And most people are fooled, right? We were. I'm sure you
Yeah.
were. Most people are
I
fooled.
never really selected the low-fat options to begin with.
well, we used to have skim milk because we thought it was healthier.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
if they take out the fat, what are you left with? More protein,
Yeah, the
which is
protein
a
increases.
really
So
high risk for cancer, the protein in milk.
It
So,
effectively becomes more carcinogenic by taking the fat out.
yeah. So it's actually,
Per volume.
yeah.
Well, I feel like we could go on for hours. I
Forever.
mean, there's so many
We have,
different-
I think, Jay.
We have. Well, this will be one of the longer ones, but I think people will definitely get a lot. We've covered a lot. We've got a lot in there. Look, we can always talk again sometime
For
Yeah.
sure.
in more detail.
Agree.
Is there anything else you'd like to touch on before we wrap up at all?
I think we've
No.
touched on
Thank
lots
you
of
so
things.
We've touched on lots of
much.
things. Oh, thank you so much for joining. I've definitely found the information that you've passed on to me very life-changing. Hopefully other people listening to this will take a lot away from it. And if they do have any questions for you, I'm assuming they can just message you on Facebook
absolutely.
and get in touch.
Yeah, through Food is Medicine Australia, yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys.
Thank
and
you.
Thanks, Jamie.
speak soon.
Really
See you.
enjoyed the chat.
Thank
Good on
you.
you. Thank you.